The cold didn't care that Elena Cross was still breathing. It wrapped around her ribs like iron bands, squeezing tighter with each shallow gasp. Snow filled her mouth when she tried to scream. Her hands, bound behind her back with rough hemp that had already rubbed her wrists raw, had gone numb an hour ago, or maybe it was 3 hours. Time stopped meaning anything when you were freezing to death. She lay where they'd thrown her, half buried in a snowdrift at the bottom of Iron Hollow Valley, and tried to remember how to fight. But fighting was how she'd gotten here. 3 days earlier, she'd been a different kind of desperate. The kind that came from grief, not terror. Her husband Thomas had been dead for 2 weeks, pneumonia that turned his lungs to stone in 4 days flat. They'd buried him in frozen ground so hard the grave diggers had to build fires to soften the earth. Elena had stood at the grave with dry eyes because she'd already cried herself empty, and the widows of the settlement had whispered about it. Not natural, they said. A wife should weep. A wife should do a lot of things, according to the good people of Ashford Settlement. She should remarry quickly. She should choose a man of standing. She should be grateful when Victor Hale himself, the settlement's founder, its self-appointed moral authority, the man who decided which families got supplies and which ones learned what winter hunger felt like, expressed interest in making her his third wife. Elena had different ideas. "I'd rather freeze," she'd told him. Turned out, he'd taken that as a suggestion. The memory played behind her eyelids now, as sharp and cutting as the wind. Victor Hale standing in her cabin 3 nights ago, backlit by her own fire, his shadow stretching across the floor like something that wanted to swallow her whole. He wasn't a tall man, but he carried himself like height didn't matter when you owned everything that mattered. His beard was steel gray, his eyes the color of dirty ice. "You're making this harder than it needs to be, Elena." She'd been scrubbing Thomas's shirts, something to do with her hands, something to keep the silence from eating her alive. She didn't look up. "I'm not making anything hard. I said no." "You said no." He repeated it slowly, like the words were in a foreign language. "Do you understand what that means? For a woman in your position? My position." Elena's hand stilled in the wash basin. The water had gone cold. Everything went cold eventually out here. "You mean widowed?" "I mean alone, unprotected. A woman with no man to speak for her, no sons to provide for her. Do you know what happens to women like that when winter comes?" "I imagine you're about to tell me." The slap came fast enough to snap her head sideways, not hard enough to knock her down. Victor Hale was too calculated for that, just hard enough to remind her that he could. "I'm offering you a place," he said quietly. "Security, a future. Most women would be grateful." Elena's cheek burned. She straightened slowly, meeting his eyes for the first time. "I'm not most women." "No." Something cold moved behind his gaze. "You're not." He'd left then, but the threat hung in the air like smoke. By morning, the settlement council, 6 men, all chosen by Victor, had called an emergency meeting. By noon, they'd declared her unfit to maintain property alone and seized her cabin for redistribution to a family in need. By sunset, when she'd tried to argue, they'd called her hysterical, dangerous, a corrupting influence on the other women. By midnight, they'd come for her. 4 men. She'd recognized 3 of them, neighbors she'd fed during the last hard winter, men whose wives she'd helped birth babies. Their faces were stone as they hauled her from what used to be her home. She'd fought, screamed until her throat bled, clawed Jacob Fletcher's face hard enough to leave marks. It hadn't mattered. They'd tied her hands, gagged her with cloth that tasted like kerosene, and dragged her 3 miles into Iron Hollow Valley, the place where the settlement dumped things it wanted to forget. Animal carcasses, failed crops, broken tools, women who said no. "You made your choice," Jacob had said, not meeting her eyes as he cut the ropes around her ankles. "May the wilderness teach you the humility you refuse to learn among civilized people." Then they'd left her. That was 6 hours ago, maybe 7. The sun was dying now, bleeding out across the western ridge. Elena had managed to work the gag off by scraping her face against a rock, but her hands were still bound. She'd tried to walk, made it maybe 20 feet before her frozen legs gave out. Now she couldn't feel anything below her knees. The snow was still falling. She was going to die here. The thought arrived with surprising clarity, almost peaceful. She was going to die in this valley, and by morning she'd be another shape under the snow, and in a week or a month some hunter might find her bones and wonder whose daughter she'd been. By next winter, even that would be gone. No. The word came from somewhere deeper than thought. Some animal part of her brain that didn't care about settlements or justice or whether fighting was ladylike. It just knew one thing: survive. Elena rolled onto her side, ice crackling in her hair. Her fingers were useless, but she still had arms. She dug her elbows into the snow and dragged herself forward. 6 inches, then 6 more. Her dress caught on something and tore. She kept moving. A sound stopped her. Hoofbeats. She froze, listening. It was full dark now, the kind of darkness that turned trees into monsters and made distances impossible to judge. But she heard it clearly. A horse, moving slow through the snow, coming closer. They'd come back. Terror shot through her like lightning, burning away the numbness. They'd come back to finish it, to make sure she was dead, or maybe Victor had decided to deliver some final sermon about obedience and the wages of pride. She tried to move faster, but her body had nothing left. The hoofbeats got louder. Then a voice, rough and irritated. "What the hell?" Not Victor's voice. The horse stopped. Elena heard the creak of leather as someone dismounted, boots crunching through snow. She managed to roll onto her back, looking up at a figure silhouetted against the stars. "You alive?" The voice was male, deep, with the kind of weariness that came from seeing too many things that shouldn't be possible. Elena tried to speak. Her throat produced something between a croak and a wheeze. The figure moved closer, and she got her first real look at him. A man in a heavy coat, probably 40 or close to it, with a face that looked like it had been carved from the same rock as the mountains. Dark hair going gray at the temples, eyes that didn't miss anything. He crouched beside her, and those eyes went hard when he saw the ropes around her wrists. "Who did this?" She managed one word. "Settlement." His jaw tightened. He pulled a knife from his belt, and for one wild moment, Elena thought this was it. This was how it ended, saved from freezing just to get her throat cut by a stranger in the dark. But he just cut the ropes carefully, and she felt blood start to return to her hands in hot, agonizing waves. "Can you stand?" She tried, made it halfway before her legs buckled. He caught her. Movement so smooth and automatic it was clear he'd done this before, caught falling things, and lifted her like she weighed nothing. "I've got a ranch," he said, already moving toward the horse. 2 hours from here. You'll live that long if you don't quit on me." "Who?" Her voice cracked. "Who are you?" "Caleb Ward." He settled her on the horse, then swung up behind her. "And you just used up all the small talk you're getting tonight. Save your strength." The horse moved, and the world started to blur. Elena felt herself slipping, consciousness fraying at the edges. She grabbed onto Caleb's coat with numb fingers. "Why?" The word came out barely audible. "Why help me?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "I don't leave people to die, even when they probably deserve it." She would have argued, but darkness took her first. When Elena opened her eyes, she thought she'd died after all, and this was whatever came after. Warmth. Real warmth, the kind that didn't come from a failing fire in a drafty cabin, but from somewhere solid and permanent. She was lying in a bed, an actual bed, with a mattress and blankets that smelled like lye soap and cedar. Above her, rough-hewn beams crossed a ceiling. Daylight streamed through a window, bright enough to hurt. She tried to sit up. Her body had other ideas, screaming protest through every muscle. "Easy," a woman's voice, matter of fact. "You've been out 2 days. Your body needs time to remember how to work." Elena turned her head, slowly, because even that hurt, and saw a woman probably 10 years older than her, weathered in the way frontier women got weathered, all competence and hard-earned survival. She was stirring something in a pot over a small stove. "Where?" "Ward Ranch. Caleb found you half frozen in Iron Hollow. I'm Marie, his foreman's wife. I've been keeping you alive." She brought over a cup of something that steamed. "Broth. Your stomach won't handle anything heavier yet." The broth was thin and salty, and the best thing Elena had ever tasted. She drank it in careful sips, her hands shaking. "The settlement," she said between sips. "How far?" "Far enough they won't come looking without a reason." Marie settled into a chair, watching her with eyes that had seen plenty of hard stories. Caleb said you were tied up, said it looked like someone meant for you to die out there. Elena set down the empty cup. They did. Want to tell me why? So Elena told her. Not everything. Her throat was still raw, her thoughts still scattered, but enough. Victor Hale. The forced marriage, the cabin they'd stolen, the valley. Marie listened without interrupting. When Elena finished, she just nodded once, like none of it surprised her. Men like that, she said quietly, they can't stand a woman who knows her own mind, makes them feel small, and small men do terrible things to feel big again. I should have just agreed, Elena heard herself say. I should have… No. Marie's voice cut through the self-recrimination like a blade. Don't you dare! What happened to you wasn't your fault. It was theirs. Every man who put his hands on you, every person who looked away, that's on them. Something cracked open in Elena's chest. She'd been holding herself together through sheer stubbornness, but kindness, real kindness, without conditions, that broke through. She started crying, and once she started, she couldn't stop. Great heaving sobs that hurt her ribs and made her head pound. Marie didn't try to comfort her, didn't pat her hand or tell her it would be all right. She just sat there, steady and present, letting Elena break apart in a place where it was safe to break. When the tears finally stopped, Elena felt hollow but lighter, like she'd been carrying something too heavy and had finally set it down. What happens now? She asked. Marie stood, collecting the empty cup. Now you heal. Then you decide what comes next. Caleb doesn't turn people away, but he doesn't keep anyone prisoner either. When you're strong enough, you make your own choice about where you go. And if they come looking for me, something fierce moved across Marie's face. Then they'll learn that Ward Ranch isn't settlement territory. We don't follow their rules here. Over the next week, Elena learned what that meant. Ward Ranch wasn't like the settlement. There were no councils of self-important men deciding who deserved what. No sermons about women's proper place. No sense that survival was something you earned through obedience. The ranch was hard work and straight dealing. Caleb ran it with a crew of about 15 people, ranch hands, a blacksmith, 2 families with young kids, and Marie's husband John, who'd been with Caleb since the beginning. They raised cattle, horses, and enough crops to feed themselves through winter. Everyone worked. Everyone ate. Nobody's voice got discounted because of what they were born with between their legs. Elena met Caleb on her 3rd day up. She'd been sitting on the porch of the small cabin where Marie had been tending her, watching the morning routine of the ranch, when he'd appeared. "You're looking less dead," he said by way of greeting. "You really know how to flatter a woman." The corner of his mouth twitched. Might have been a smile. Hard to tell. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got trampled by a horse, then frozen, then trampled again." Elena studied him in the daylight, same hard face, same eyes that didn't miss anything. "Thank you for finding me, for bringing me here." He shrugged, uncomfortable. "I was heading back from checking fence lines. Took a different route because the main trail looked bad. Found you. Lucky." "Maybe." Something unreadable crossed his face. "Or maybe someone was looking out for you." He didn't say who. Elena didn't ask. "The settlement," she said carefully. "Will they come looking?" "Probably not. They think you're dead. Far as they're concerned, problem solved." His jaw tightened. "But if they do come, they'll find out that I don't give a damn about their authority. This is my land, my rules." "What are your rules?" Caleb looked at her for a long moment. "Work hard. Deal straight. Don't hurt people who don't hurt you first. Everything else is just details." It sounded too simple to be real, but as Elena healed and started moving around the ranch, she saw it in action. Nobody bowed and scraped to Caleb. People spoke their minds. When a decision needed making that affected everyone, everyone got a say. It wasn't paradise. There were arguments, disagreements, the normal friction of people trying to survive together. But it was honest. By the 2nd week, Elena was helping Marie in the kitchen. By the 3rd, she was mending clothes and helping tend the chickens. Small things, but they made her feel human again, made her feel useful. She tried not to think about the settlement, tried not to imagine her cabin given to some other family, her things distributed like she'd never existed. Tried not to wonder if anyone had mourned her. But the thoughts came anyway, especially at night when the ranch went quiet and there was nothing to distract her from the memories. She was sitting outside one evening, watching the sun die behind the mountains, when Caleb found her. You're thinking too loud, he said, settling onto the porch step beside her. Didn't know thoughts had volume. Yours do. You get this look, like you're arguing with someone who's not there. Elena pulled her shawl tighter. The air had that knife-edge quality that promised snow. I'm trying to figure out what I'm supposed to do, where I'm supposed to go. You planning on leaving? I can't stay here forever. This isn't my place. Could be. Caleb's voice was neutral, carefully so. We could use another set of hands. Marie's been saying we need help with the preserving and the sewing. You'd earn your keep. Just like that? You'd let a stranger stay? You're not a stranger anymore. And I've seen how you work. You're not afraid to get your hands dirty. That counts for more than a familiar face. Elena turned to look at him. Why did you really save me? The truth. Caleb was quiet, staring out at the darkening valley. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. I had a sister once, Ruth. She married a man our parents approved of. Good family, good prospects, all the right things on paper. Turned out he had a temper and a heavy hand. She tried to leave him. Her husband and his family said she was being hysterical, dramatic. Said she needed discipline. He paused. Elena waited. They found her in a river 3 months later. Officially, she slipped and fell. Everyone knew the truth. Nobody did anything about it. His hands curled into fists. I was 17. Couldn't do a damn thing except watch them bury her and pretend it was an accident. So when I saw you in that valley, tied up and left to freeze because you said no to some powerful man who thought he owned you, I guess I was trying to do for you what I couldn't do for Ruth. I'm sorry, Elena said quietly. Don't be, just don't waste the chance you got. Don't let them make you small. I don't feel very big right now. You survived. That's big enough. They sat in comfortable silence as full dark came on. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. The sound used to frighten Elena back at the settlement, where every wilderness noise was painted as a threat. Here, it just sounded lonely. I'll stay, she said, if the offer's real. It's real. What if they come looking? What if Victor? Then we deal with it. Caleb stood, dusting off his pants. But until then, you're under my roof. That means something out here. He went inside, leaving Elena alone with the stars and the slow realization that she'd just chosen to plant her feet instead of run. It should have felt terrifying. Instead, it felt like the first solid ground she'd stood on since Thomas died. She didn't know it then, but that choice, that decision to stay and fight instead of disappear, was going to change everything. The first sign of trouble came 3 weeks later. Elena was in the barn, showing one of the ranch kids how to properly braid rope, when John came in fast. Where's Caleb? North pasture, checking the herd. Why? John's face was grim. Rider coming in, flying settlement colors. Elena's stomach dropped. How many? Just one, but he's carrying a message stick. In Frontier territory, a message stick meant official business. It meant whoever sent it expected to be taken seriously. By the time they reached the main house, Caleb was already there, standing in the yard with his arms crossed. The rider was young, maybe 19, sitting on a horse too fine for ranch work. Settlement money bought horses like that. I'm here on behalf of Victor Hale and the Ashford Settlement Council, the kid said, his voice trying for authority and landing somewhere around nervous. I have a message for the ranch owner. I'm listening, Caleb said. The rider pulled out a rolled piece of paper, tied with ribbon like it was some kind of proclamation. He read from it, his voice gaining confidence as he went. The council wishes to inform you that a woman named Elena Cross, formerly of Ashford Settlement, was declared unfit and expelled for moral corruption and threat to community peace. Should this woman appear on your property, you are obligated under territorial cooperation law to return her to settlement authority for proper judgment. Failure to comply will result in— Let me stop you there, Caleb said, his voice dangerously quiet. First, there's no such thing as territorial cooperation law. You made that up, or Victor did. Second, Elena Cross is a resident of Ward Ranch now. That makes her my concern, not the settlements. Third, you can tell Victor Hale that if he wants to discuss anything, he can come here himself instead of sending a kid to read made-up rules. The rider's face went red. The council has the authority. The council has authority over the settlement. This isn't the settlement. You're on my land, boy. That means my rules. She's a criminal. No, Elena said, stepping forward. I'm a woman who refused to be property. The rider's eyes went wide when he saw her. You're supposed to be dead? Elena smiled, and it wasn't friendly. Sorry to disappoint. The kid looked between them, clearly out of his depth. I have to report back. They're going to want answers. Then tell them this, Caleb said. Elena Cross is under my protection. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me directly. But they should know. I don't negotiate with people who tie up women and leave them to freeze. The rider wheeled his horse and took off fast, like he was worried they'd change their minds about letting him leave. When the dust settled, Marie spoke from the porch. That's going to bring them here. I know, Caleb said. Could get ugly. It already was ugly. Now it's just going to be honest about it. Elena felt everyone's eyes on her. The ranch hands who'd gathered to watch, the families, Marie and John, all of them looking at her like they were trying to decide if she was worth the trouble that was coming. I can leave, she said. I can go somewhere else, somewhere they won't find me. You don't need to… No. Caleb's voice was flat, final. Running just teaches them they can keep doing this. Someone has to tell them no. That someone doesn't have to be you. He looked at her then, really looked at her. You told them no. It almost killed you. I'm not going to let that happen again. This could get people hurt. People are already hurt. The women in that settlement, living under Victor's thumb, too scared to speak up because they've seen what happens when you do. They're hurt. The men who know it's wrong but go along anyway because it's easier, they're hurt too, just in a different way. Maybe it's time someone stood up and said enough. Elena wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he was being foolish, risking his ranch and his people for someone he barely knew. But she'd seen the look in his eyes when he talked about his sister. This wasn't about Elena anymore. It was about every woman like Ruth who'd been silenced. Then we'd better get ready, she said. The warning came 2 days later. A dead coyote hung from the gate with a note. Return what you stole or learn the price of defiance. Caleb burned the note but kept the ashes. They're trying to scare us, John said, standing watch on the porch that night. Classic intimidation. Is it working? Elena asked. On me? No. I've dealt with worse. He glanced at her. Question is, are you scared? Elena thought about it honestly. Terrified. But I'm tired of running. I'm tired of men like Victor thinking they can do whatever they want because women are too afraid to fight back. Good. John checked his rifle. Fear's healthy, keeps you sharp. It's panic that gets you killed. Over the next week, the ranch prepared. Not for war, Caleb was clear about that, but for the possibility of trouble. They fortified the barn, stockpiled supplies, made sure everyone knew where to go if things went bad. The families with young kids were given the option to leave temporarily. None of them took it. We knew what Ward Ranch stood for when we came here, one of the fathers said. That doesn't change because someone's trying to bully us. Elena threw herself into the work, partly to be useful and partly to keep from thinking too hard about what she'd set in motion. She helped Marie preserve vegetables, mended every piece of clothing that needed mending, even learned basic first aid from the ranch's unofficial medic. At night, she couldn't sleep. She'd lie awake, listening to the sounds of the ranch and waiting for hoofbeats that would mean Victor had come. One night, unable to stand it anymore, she got up and went outside. The stars were sharp and cold overhead. She was so lost in thought she didn't hear Caleb until he spoke. You're going to wear a hole in the porch if you keep pacing. She jumped. I didn't hear you. You weren't listening. He had 2 cups of something hot, offered her one. Coffee. Marie made it strong enough to wake the dead. Elena took it gratefully. The warmth felt good against her cold hands. Can't sleep? Can. Choose not to. Someone needs to keep watch. You have people for that. Yeah, but they're watching the perimeter. I'm watching you. She looked at him sharply. Why? Because you're thinking about leaving again. I can see it in how you stand, like you're ready to bolt any second. Elena didn't deny it. Every day I stay here, I put everyone at risk. Victor won't let this go. He can't afford to. If he backs down, it shows weakness, and men like him would rather burn the world than look weak. So what? You run, he wins. You disappear, every other woman in that settlement learns the lesson. Step out of line and you'll be erased. At least they'd be alive. That's not living. That's just slow dying. Caleb sipped his coffee, staring out at the dark valley. I built this place to be different, to be somewhere people didn't have to bow to tyrants or pretend might makes right. If I let Victor chase you off my land, what's the point? I might as well be just another bully with a bigger fence. You're not a bully. Not yet. But give me enough excuses to compromise, enough reasons to look the other way, and I could be. That's how it happens. Little surrenders, one at a time, until you wake up and realize you've become everything you swore you'd fight against. Elena was quiet for a long moment. Your sister, Ruth, would she have wanted you to do this? Caleb's jaw tightened. Ruth would have told me to burn the settlement to the ground. She had a temper. But yeah, I think she'd approve of standing up to men who think women are property. I don't want anyone to die for me. Then don't let it be for nothing. If trouble comes and people get hurt, the only way to make that mean something is to win, to show that standing up to bullies works. Otherwise, we're just martyrs, and martyrs are only useful to the people who kill them. He was right. Elena hated that he was right, but he was. I'm scared, she admitted. Good. So am I. You don't look scared. I've had more practice hiding it. He finished his coffee, set down the cup. Get some sleep. Real sleep, not just lying there with your eyes closed. Tomorrow's going to be another long day, and you'll need your strength. What if they come tomorrow? Then they come, and we deal with it. But sitting up all night worrying won't change anything except make you too tired to fight if you need to. Elena wanted to argue, but exhaustion was pulling at her like an undertow. She went back inside, back to her small room, and for the first time in weeks she slept hard and dreamless. When she woke, the sun was already up and the ranch was in motion, because Victor Hale had sent his answer. 20 riders, armed and carrying torches, sitting their horses just beyond the ranch's property line. And standing at the front, dressed in black like he was attending a funeral, was Victor himself. The reckoning had come. Elena saw them from the kitchen window, a line of riders stretching across the horizon like a scar. Her hands were wrist-deep in dishwater, and for one absurd moment she thought about finishing the plates before dealing with the armed men who'd come to drag her back to hell. Routine felt safer than reality. Marie appeared beside her, drying her hands on her apron with movements that were too careful, too controlled. Don't go out there. They came for me, which is exactly why you stay inside. Let Caleb handle this. But Elena was already moving toward the door, her heart hammering against her ribs. She'd spent 3 weeks hiding behind other people's protection, letting Caleb and his ranch hands stand between her and the consequences of saying no. She was done hiding. The morning air bit cold and sharp. Frost still clung to the grass where the sun hadn't reached, and her breath came out in clouds. The ranch had gone eerily quiet. No one working, no children playing, just people standing in doorways and behind windows, watching. Caleb stood in the center of the yard, John flanking him on one side, 3 other ranch hands spread out behind them. They weren't holding weapons, but Elena knew where the rifles were. Everyone did. She walked up beside Caleb, and he didn't look at her, but his jaw tightened. I told you to stay inside. You don't get to tell me anything. This is my fight. It's about to be everyone's fight if you don't... Gentlemen! Victor Hale's voice cut across the distance, smooth and cultured, the kind of voice that made pronouncements sound like inevitabilities. And ladies, I appreciate you gathering to receive us. He rode forward slowly, the other 19 riders staying back like a threat that didn't need to be spoken. Up close, Victor looked exactly how Elena remembered. Gray beard, perfectly trimmed, eyes cold as January ice, sitting his horse like he was passing judgment from on high. Mr. Ward, Victor said, inclining his head with false courtesy. I believe we have a misunderstanding to clear up. No misunderstanding, Caleb said flatly. You want Elena. She's not going anywhere. That about cover it? Victor's smile didn't reach his eyes. I'm afraid it's more complicated than that. Elena Cross was lawfully expelled from Ashford Settlement for... Lawfully? Elena's voice came out harder than she expected. You tied me up and left me to freeze. There wasn't a trial. There wasn't a vote. You just decided I didn't have the right to say no to you. Victor looked at her then, really looked at her, and something ugly moved behind his pleasant expression. You were given a choice, Elena. A generous offer, in fact. You chose poorly. I chose not to marry you. That's not a crime. It is when your refusal threatens the moral foundation of our community. When other women see your defiance and begin to question their own duties. He shifted in his saddle, addressing Caleb now, like Elena wasn't worth engaging directly. Surely you understand, Mr. Ward, a society requires order, rules. When individuals place their own desires above the common good, chaos follows. Funny thing about order, Caleb said, it tends to benefit the people making the rules. I've built Ashford Settlement from nothing, given families a place to thrive, to raise their children in safety and prosperity. All I ask in return is respect for the structure that makes that possible. And anyone who doesn't respect your structure gets dumped in a valley to die? Victor's pleasant mask slipped slightly. Elena was given every opportunity to rejoin the community. She refused. At that point, what would you have me do? Allow one woman's pride to undermine everything we've built? You could have let her keep her cabin. Let her live alone if that's what she wanted. A woman alone is a danger to herself and others. Surely you've seen enough of the frontier to know that. What I know, Caleb said, his voice dropping to something dangerous, is that you're standing on my property making demands you have no right to make. Elena stays. You leave. End of conversation. Victor studied him for a long moment, and Elena saw the calculation happening behind those cold eyes. He'd come here expecting intimidation to work, expecting Caleb to back down when faced with superior numbers. The fact that it wasn't working seemed to genuinely puzzle him. I had hoped to resolve this peacefully, Victor said finally. I truly did. But you're forcing my hand, Mr. Ward. The Settlement Council has authorized me to recover our property by any means necessary. Elena's not property. The cabin she occupied was settlement property, the supplies she consumed, the debts her late husband owed. Victor pulled out a piece of paper, unfolded it with theatrical precision. According to our records, Thomas Cross borrowed against future harvests to cover medical expenses. Those debts transferred to his widow upon his death. Until they're repaid, she belongs to the settlement. That's horseshit, John said from beside Caleb. You can't own a person's labor like that. Nevertheless, it's legally binding under settlement law. Elena signed the agreement herself. Elena's stomach dropped. She remembered Thomas, desperate and dying, signing papers that Victor's men had brought. She'd added her name where they told her to, too worried about keeping her husband alive to read the fine print. She'd thought it was just a loan. Even if that was legal, Caleb said, which it's not, I could pay whatever debt you claim she owes. Name your price. Victor smiled, and it was the smile of a man who'd been waiting for this. $300. Silence dropped like a stone. $300 was a fortune out here, more than most families saw in 5 years. It was an impossible sum, and everyone knew it. You're trying to buy a person, Caleb said, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. I'm collecting a legitimate debt. If you can't pay it, then Elena returns with us to work it off. Those are the terms. And if we refuse? Victor looked back at his riders, then at the ranch, his gaze moving over the buildings and the people watching from windows. Then I'd be very concerned about fire season. Terrible thing, these dry frontier winters. A single spark can burn down everything a man's built. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Caleb's hand moved toward his belt, and Elena saw 3 of Victor's riders reach for their rifles. Don't, she said quietly, putting a hand on Caleb's arm. He's trying to provoke you. He wants an excuse. An excuse for what? To claim self-defense when he burns this place to the ground. Victor's smile widened. Smart girl. I always said you had potential, Elena. Such a waste. Elena stepped forward, away from Caleb's protective stance, and addressed Victor directly. If I come with you, will you leave the ranch alone? No, Caleb said immediately. Absolutely not. If you come willingly, Victor said, ignoring Caleb, and publicly acknowledge your debt and your wrongdoing, then yes, the ranch will be left in peace. Elena, don't. I need to think about it, she said, cutting Caleb off. Give me until tomorrow. Come back then, and I'll have an answer. Victor considered this, clearly weighing whether it was a trick. Finally, he nodded. Tomorrow. Dawn. But if you're not here, or if you've run, the deal is void, and Mr. Ward will learn exactly how far the settlement's reach extends. He wheeled his horse and rode off, his 20 men following. They didn't gallop, just rode slow and steady, making sure everyone understood they weren't afraid, weren't in a hurry, weren't concerned about anything Ward Ranch might do. When they were out of sight, Caleb rounded on Elena. What the hell was that? Buying time? For what? You're not seriously considering? I'm considering that he just threatened to burn down your ranch and kill everyone here if I don't cooperate. So yes, I'm considering it. Like hell you are, Marie said, storming out of the house. You think going back there will save anyone? Men like Victor don't make deals, they make examples. You go back, you're dead within a month. Accident, illness, suicide, he'll find a way to make it look natural. She's right, John said. This isn't about debt or law or any of that. He can't afford to let you get away with defying him. You're a symbol now. Every woman in that settlement who's thought about saying no, they're watching to see what happens to you. Elena knew they were right, but she also knew what Victor was capable of. She'd seen it before. Families who crossed him finding their homes burned, their livestock dead, their wells poisoned. Always with plausible deniability, always with some explanation that wasn't quite believable, but couldn't quite be proven false. So what do we do? She asked. Fight? He's got 20 men, and that's just what he brought today. The settlement can field 3 times that many if he calls them up. We don't fight, Caleb said slowly, like he was working through it as he spoke. We prepare to fight, and we make sure he knows it'll cost him more than he's willing to pay. How? Fortify, dig in, make this place hard enough to take that he has to think twice. And if he doesn't think twice? Caleb met her eyes. Then we find out what we're really made of. The ranch transformed over the next 18 hours. What had been a working cattle operation became something else. Not quite a fortress, but close. They built firing positions in the barn loft, reinforced the main house windows, dug trenches around the perimeter. Every adult who could hold a rifle got one, and a quick lesson in how to use it. Elena worked alongside everyone else, hauling sandbags and boarding windows. Her hands blistered and her back screamed, but she welcomed the pain. It was better than thinking. Marie found her after dark, sitting behind the barn with her head in her hands. You're allowed to be scared? I'm not scared, Elena lied. I'm furious. At myself, mostly. I brought this down on all of you. You stood up to a bully. That's not a crime. Tell that to the people who'll die when he comes back. Marie sat down beside her, groaning slightly. I ever tell you how I met John? No. I was running from a man. Not like your situation. I'd actually married this one, my first husband. Big mistake. He liked to use his fists when he drank, and he drank most days. One night he came at me with a knife, said he was tired of my mouth. I grabbed the skillet off the stove and hit him hard enough to crack his skull. Elena looked at her sharply. Did you kill him? Don't know. Didn't wait to find out. I ran, and I kept running until I ended up here. John was the first person who didn't ask questions, didn't demand explanations, just offered work and a place to sleep. I've been here 7 years now, and I've never regretted it. Not once. What's your point? My point is that some places are worth fighting for. Some people too. Caleb built this ranch to be different, to be somewhere people like us could land without getting crushed. If we let Victor burn it down without a fight, where does that leave everyone else who needs somewhere to run to? It leaves them alive, maybe. Or maybe it teaches them that there's nowhere to run, nobody who'll stand up, nothing but surrender and hope the boot doesn't press down too hard. Is that the world you want to live in? Elena didn't have an answer. She found Caleb later that night checking the fortifications one last time. He looked exhausted, and she realized he probably hadn't slept since Victor's visit. You should rest, she said. I'll rest when this is over. And if it's never over, if Victor keeps coming back, keeps escalating, then we keep fighting. He turned to face her. You think I don't know the odds? I know exactly what we're up against, but I also know that if I back down now, I become everything I swore I'd never be. I become my father. You've never mentioned your father. Not much to mention. He was a coward. Watched his daughter get beaten and broken by her husband and did nothing because making waves would have been uncomfortable. Told himself he was being practical, being smart. Truth was, he was just scared. When Ruth died, he didn't even blame her husband. He blamed her for being difficult. Caleb's hands curled into fists. I swore I'd never be like him. Never look away, never make excuses, never let fear make me small. If I let Victor take you, that's what I'd be doing. That's who I'd become. This isn't about your father or your sister, Elena said gently. This is about right now, real people, real consequences. You could lose everything. I already lost everything once. Lost Ruth, lost the ability to look at myself without seeing a kid who was too weak to save his own sister. This ranch? It's not just land and cattle. It's proof that I'm not that kid anymore, that I can build something worth protecting, that I can stand up when it counts. He paused, looking out at the dark valley. But I can't make you stay. If you want to go, if you think that's the right choice, I won't stop you. This is your life, your decision. Elena thought about it, really thought about it. She could leave, disappear into the frontier, find some other settlement far enough away that Victor's reach didn't extend. Start over, again, and spend the rest of her life looking over her shoulder. Or she could stay, fight, risk everything for a place she'd only known for a few weeks, for people who owed her nothing. I'm staying, she said. Caleb nodded once like he'd known all along what she'd choose. Then we'd better get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be interesting. Dawn came cold and bright, the kind of morning that made everything look clean and possible. Elena stood on the porch of the main house, watching the eastern horizon for riders that hadn't come yet. Behind her, the ranch was ready. Rifles positioned, people in place, everyone knowing their role if things went bad. Marie had insisted Elena stay in the house, away from the initial confrontation, and for once Elena hadn't argued. She wasn't useful with a gun, and getting shot in the opening minutes wouldn't help anyone. The sun climbed higher, still no riders. Maybe he changed his mind, one of the younger ranch hands said hopefully. He didn't change his mind, Caleb said from his position by the gate. He's making us wait. Psychological warfare. He was right. They waited an hour, then two. The tension stretched like wire, everyone's nerves wearing thinner with each passing minute. Elena found herself jumping at small sounds, a door banging, a horse whinnying, wind rattling a loose board. They came at mid-morning, when everyone was tired of waiting and starting to think maybe it was over. 30 riders this time, not 20. Victor had brought reinforcements. They stopped at the same spot as before, just beyond the property line. Victor sat his horse like a king, surveying rebellious subjects. I gave you until dawn, he called out. It's well past dawn now. Then you should have come at dawn, Caleb called back. Elena, come out where I can see you. Elena stepped onto the porch, making sure she was visible. Her legs felt unsteady, but she kept her spine straight. Have you made your decision? Victor asked. I have. I'm staying here. The debt you claim doesn't exist. The contract was signed under duress, and you have no legal authority to enforce it anyway. Go home, Victor. His face darkened. That's unfortunate. I was hoping reason would prevail. Reason did prevail. Your version of justice doesn't extend past your settlement line. Everything extends past the settlement line. The frontier is lawless precisely because good people fail to impose order. I'm trying to build something better. You're choosing chaos. I'm choosing freedom. Freedom. Victor said the word like it tasted bad. You sound like the revolutionaries who think tearing down structure will somehow liberate humanity. It never does. It just creates space for stronger men to fill. Then maybe we need different structures. Ones that don't require women to surrender their lives to avoid being murdered. Victor's pleasant mask finally cracked completely. You self-righteous little fool. You think you're striking a blow for independence? You're signing death warrants, not just your own, everyone here. He gestured to his men, and they started moving forward. That's far enough, Caleb said, and there was steel in his voice. You cross onto my land without permission, that's trespassing. I'm within my rights to defend my property. Your rights? Victor laughed. We're 3 days from the nearest marshal. By the time anyone arrives to investigate, this will all be settled. So will you, John said from the barn loft, his rifle clearly visible now. First shot I take drops you. Your men might burn us down, but you won't be around to see it. Victor's horse shifted nervously, sensing the tension. For the first time, Victor looked uncertain. You'd start a war over one woman? No, Caleb said. I'd start a war over the principle that might doesn't make right. That people have the right to say no. That frontier justice doesn't mean whatever the biggest bully decides it means. The standoff held, 30 armed men against a fortified ranch with maybe a dozen shooters. Bad odds, but not impossible. Victor's men knew it too. Elena could see them shifting in their saddles, doing the math on whether this was worth dying for. Then a voice from the back of Victor's group. "This is wrong." Everyone turned. One of the riders, a man probably in his 50s, had removed his hat. Elena recognized him, David Pierce, one of the settlement's original families. "David," Victor said, his voice dropping to a warning tone. "Now is not the time. It's past time." David rode forward, stopping between the two groups. "I didn't sign up for this, Victor. For burning out neighbors, threatening women, acting like we're some kind of army. We're maintaining order. We're being bullies. I've kept my mouth shut for too long, gone along because it was easier than standing up. But this," he gestured at the ranch, "this isn't right, and everyone here knows it." Another rider spoke up. "He's got a point, Victor. Elena didn't do anything wrong. She just didn't want to marry you. And for that you'd kill people?" A woman's voice this time, one of the settlement wives, who'd apparently come along. "I've known Elena since she arrived in Ashford. She's not a criminal, she's just someone who said no." Victor's face went purple. "All of you will return to the settlement immediately, or face expulsion yourselves." "Expel me then," David said. "I'm done." He turned his horse and rode away, back toward the settlement. After a moment, 3 others followed him. Then 2 more. Within minutes, Victor's force had shrunk by nearly a third. The remaining riders looked uncertain now, glancing at each other and at Victor, clearly wondering if they were on the right side of this. Victor sat frozen in his saddle, watching his authority evaporate in real time. Elena could see him trying to calculate, trying to find a way to regain control of the situation. Finally, he spoke, his voice tight with barely suppressed rage. "This isn't over. You think a few cowards abandoning their duty changes anything? You've made an enemy today, Ward. You and everyone who stands with you." "I've had worse enemies," Caleb said. Victor wheeled his horse and rode off, the remaining riders following. But there was no swagger this time, no slow ride to demonstrate power. They left like men who'd lost something important and weren't sure how to get it back. When they were gone, the ranch erupted in relief. People were laughing, crying, hugging each other like they'd just survived a war. Maybe they had. Elena found herself shaking, the adrenaline finally catching up with her. Marie appeared with a flask of something strong, and Elena drank without asking what it was. "We did it," Marie said, still sounding surprised. "We actually did it." "We won a battle," Caleb said, approaching them. "War's not over." "Always the optimist," John said, clapping him on the shoulder. "Can't you just enjoy the victory for 5 minutes?" "I'll enjoy it when Victor Hale is no longer a threat." He was right to be cautious. Over the next few days, it became clear that Victor hadn't given up. He'd just changed tactics. Riders started appearing at the ranch's borders, watching, not threatening, just present, a constant reminder that they were being observed. Then supplies started becoming harder to get. The general store in the nearest town, which had always sold to Ward Ranch, suddenly claimed they were out of stock on items they'd had in abundance the week before. The blacksmith who'd been shoeing their horses for 3 years suddenly had no availability. Victor was using his influence to isolate them, to make life difficult without direct confrontation. "He's smart," Elena said, watching another supply wagon turn away at the gate. "He can't beat us in a straight fight, so he's trying to starve us out." "Won't work," Caleb said. "We've got enough put away to make it through winter, and we're not the only ones who've noticed what he's doing. Word's spreading." Word was indeed spreading. Over the next week, 3 more families showed up at the ranch. People who'd left the settlement after Victor's failed attack, who wanted nothing to do with his version of frontier justice. Caleb took them in, which meant more mouths to feed but also more hands to work. Elena found herself in an unexpected role, helping the new arrivals settle in, sharing her own story with women who'd lived under Victor's thumb for years. They told her things she hadn't known, stories of other women who'd disappeared or died under mysterious circumstances. Sarah Mitchell, who'd refused to let her daughter marry a man twice her age and had subsequently fallen down a well. Catherine Brooks, who'd questioned the settlement's tithing system and died of food poisoning 3 days later. The pattern was clear, and it was worse than Elena had imagined. "We need to document this," she said to Caleb one night. "Get statements, dates, details, build a case." "A case for who? There's no law out here except what people make themselves." Then maybe it's time there was. The idea took root slowly. If Victor was using the settlement's isolation to operate above the law, then the solution was to bring the law closer. To reach out to territorial authorities, to document the abuses, to force someone official to pay attention. It was risky. It meant making themselves visible, making claims that would invite scrutiny. But doing nothing meant living under the constant threat of Victor's retaliation. Elena started writing. Every story the refugees told her, every suspicious death, every woman silenced. She filled page after page with careful documentation, names and dates and circumstances. Marie helped, her experience as foreman's wife making her good at organizing information. Together they built something like a case file, evidence of a pattern of abuse stretching back years. "This is dangerous," Marie said, reading over the latest editions. "If Victor finds out you're doing this, he already wants me dead. This doesn't change that. It changes the stakes. Before, this was personal. Now you're threatening to bring down his entire operation." Good. He's hurt too many people for too long. But even as Elena said it, she felt the weight of what she was building. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every woman who'd been silenced, every family destroyed. The responsibility of it pressed down like a physical thing. She was so focused on the documentation that she almost missed the signs that something else was building. It started with the fires. Small ones at first, a haystack on the ranch's southern border, easily put out. Then a tool shed near the creek. Then a section of fence that would have released half the cattle if John hadn't spotted it in time. "He's testing us," Caleb said, staring at the charred fence posts, "seeing how we respond, where our weak points are. Or he's trying to provoke us into making a mistake," Elena said. "Give him an excuse to claim self-defense. Either way, we need more help. We can't watch every corner of this property with the people we have." Help came from an unexpected source. David Pierce, the man who'd broken ranks during the standoff, showed up at the gate with 5 others. "We'd like to help," he said simply, "if you'll have us. What about your families, your homes? We moved them out. Victor's making life hell for anyone who questioned him. We figured we'd rather make a stand here than get picked off one by one back there." The ranch's population swelled. What had been 15 people was now close to 40. They were cramped, supplies were tight, and tensions ran high as people adjusted to close quarters and constant vigilance. But something else was building too. A sense of community forged in shared danger. These weren't just refugees anymore. They were people who'd chosen to fight, who'd looked at Victor's system and said no. Elena felt it most clearly during the evening meals, when everyone gathered in the main house. The conversations were different now, less about fear, more about possibility. What would they build when this was over? What kind of community could they create free from Victor's shadow? "We'll need schools," one of the mothers said. "Real ones, where girls learn to read just like boys." "And fair distribution of resources," David added. "No more of this council decides who deserves what." "Maybe we elect the council," someone else suggested. "Everyone gets a vote, not just the men Victor approves." Caleb listened to these conversations with an expression Elena couldn't quite read. When she asked him about it later, he said, "They're planning a future. That's good. Better than just surviving day to day." But we have to survive first, and Victor's not done yet. He was right. The final confrontation was coming, inevitable as winter. Elena could feel it in the way the air itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting. It came on a night when the moon was dark, and the stars provided the only light. Elena was dreaming about snow when the gunshot woke her. She sat up so fast her head spun, hands already reaching for the boots beside her bed. Another shot cracked through the night, then 3 more in rapid succession. Voices shouting outside, men's voices, the kind of yelling that came with violence. She stumbled to the window and looked out into chaos. The ranch was burning. Not everything, not yet, but the barn was lit up like a torch, flames climbing the walls and spilling orange light across the yard. Dark shapes moved between the buildings, and more gunfire exploded from the direction of the main gate. Marie burst into the room, her face pale in the firelight. "Get down to the cellar, now!" "What's happening? What does it look like?" Victor came to finish this. Marie grabbed Elena's arm, pulling her toward the door. "The women and children are already in the cellar. You need to—" "I'm not hiding in a cellar while people die for me." "Elena?" But Elena was already moving, pushing past Marie and into the main room where Caleb was loading rifles with hands that moved too fast, too practiced. He looked up when she entered, and she saw something in his face she'd never seen before. Fear, real and raw. I told Marie to get you to safety. She tried. Where do you need me? In the cellar, out of the line of fire, anywhere but where do you need me? Caleb stared at her for half a second, then made a decision. He grabbed a rifle from the table and thrust it into her hands. You know how to use this? Thomas taught me. I'm not great, but I can hit what I'm aiming at if it's close enough. Then get to the west window, second floor. John's up there already. Anyone who gets past the outer defenses, you slow them down. Don't try to be a hero, just make noise and make them think twice. He was already moving toward the door. And Elena, don't die. I don't have time to feel guilty about it tonight. Then he was gone, running out into the firelight and the gunfire. Elena took the stairs 2 at a time, her heart trying to climb out through her throat. The rifle felt heavy and foreign in her hands, despite Thomas's lessons. She'd shot at targets, at bottles and fence posts. Never at a person. Never at someone who was shooting back. The second-floor hallway was dark, except for the orange glow filtering through the windows. She found John crouched beside the west-facing window, his rifle barrel resting on the sill. About time, he said, without looking at her. Take the south window. Anyone comes from that direction, you put rounds in their general vicinity. Don't worry about hitting them, just make them nervous. Elena positioned herself at the south window, her hands shaking so badly it took 3 tries to get the rifle settled. Below, the yard was a nightmare of movement and fire. She could see Caleb and David behind an overturned wagon, returning fire at shapes in the darkness. The barn was fully engulfed now, flames reaching toward the sky like desperate hands. Movement caught her eye. 3 men breaking from the tree line, running low toward the main house. They were carrying torches. John, she said, her voice coming out steadier than she felt. South side, 3 men with fire. Take the shot. Elena aimed at the lead runner, her finger finding the trigger. Thomas's voice in her head. Breathe out slowly, squeeze, don't pull, follow through. She fired. The recoil slammed into her shoulder and her shot went wide by at least 6 feet. But it was close enough to make the men dive for cover, their torches falling into the dirt. Good enough, John said. Keep them pinned. She fired again and again, not aiming for kills but for intimidation. The men with the torches scattered, abandoning their attempt to reach the house. One of them got brave and tried to rush forward. John's rifle cracked, and the man went down screaming, clutching his leg. The others retreated into the darkness. Reload, John said. This is just the opening act. He was right. Over the next hour, the attack came in waves, men with torches trying to set more fires, men with rifles providing covering fire from the tree line. At least 2 attempts to breach the fortified positions around the main buildings, both pushed back with casualties on both sides. Elena lost track of how many times she fired. Her shoulder was a mass of bruises from the recoil, her ears rang from the gunfire, and her hands were shaking so badly she could barely reload. But she kept shooting, kept making noise, kept being one more obstacle between Victor's men and the people she'd come to care about. Then John made a sound, half gasp, half curse, and slumped against the wall. John! Elena scrambled over to him. Blood was spreading across his shirt, high on the left side of his chest. How bad? Bad enough. His face was gray with pain. Didn't see where it came from. Get Marie. I'm not leaving you. Get Marie or I bleed out right here. Go. Elena ran, taking the stairs so fast she nearly fell, bursting into the main room where Marie was tending to 2 wounded ranch hands. John's hit. Second floor, west room. Marie's face went white, but her hands stayed steady. She grabbed her medical kit and followed Elena back up the stairs, moving with the kind of calm that came from refusing to acknowledge the terror underneath. John was conscious but fading when they reached him. Marie took one look at the wound and her mouth became a thin line. Pressure, she said to Elena. Both hands, right here, press down hard, and don't stop no matter what he says. Elena pressed. Blood welled up between her fingers, hot and sticky. John's face twisted with pain, but he didn't make a sound. Marie worked with hands that never hesitated, cutting away cloth, packing the wound, wrapping bandages tight enough to make John gasp. Outside, the gunfire continued, punctuated now by the sound of something heavy hitting the barn's walls as they started to collapse. Is he going to die? Elena asked. Not if I can help it, Marie said. But we need to get him downstairs, somewhere I can work properly. Between them, they half-carried John down the stairs and into a back room that Marie had converted into a makeshift infirmary. 3 other wounded were already there, including one of Victor's men who'd been shot trying to set fire to the house. "Why are you helping him?" Elena asked, nodding at the enemy fighter. "Because that's what doctors do," Marie said shortly. "We'll sort out who's on what side after everyone stops bleeding." She left Elena with John, pressing bandages against wounds while Marie worked on the others with a efficiency that was almost frightening. Elena had never seen this side of her. All business, no emotion, just brutal competence in the face of horror. A massive crash shook the house. Elena looked out the window and saw the barn's roof cave in, sending up a column of sparks that looked like a fountain of stars. The loss hit her physically. That barn had held supplies, tools, winter feed for the animals. Losing it meant hunger, meant hardship, meant the ranch's survival became that much harder. Assuming any of them survived the night. Caleb appeared in the doorway, his face black with smoke and his eyes wild. "How many wounded?" "4 of ours. 1 of theirs," Marie said. "John's the worst." Caleb crossed to his foreman, and something passed between them, communication without words, the kind that came from years of trust. "Don't you dare die on me," Caleb said. "Wasn't planning on it," John managed. "How's it looking out there?" "We're holding, barely. They're pulling back for now, but I don't think they're done." He was right. The attack had paused, but not stopped. Elena could see shapes moving in the darkness beyond the firelight, reorganizing, regrouping. Victor was still out there somewhere, directing his forces, and he hadn't gotten what he came for. "He's going to try again," she said. Caleb nodded. "Probably at dawn, when he can see what he's doing. We've got maybe 2 hours to prepare." "Prepare for what? We can barely hold what we have." "I know." Caleb ran a hand through his hair, leaving streaks of soot. "I'm open to suggestions." It was Elena who spoke, surprising herself. "We need to change the equation. Right now, Victor thinks he can win through attrition, burn us out, wear us down, wait until we're too tired to fight back. We need to make him think differently." "How?" Elena thought about it, her mind moving fast. "He's not here for the ranch. He's here for me. What if we give him what he wants?" "Absolutely not," Caleb said immediately. "Not actually. But what if he thinks I'm running? What if he sees me trying to escape and has to split his forces to chase me? That's suicide." "No. It's a diversion. I head out on horseback, visible enough that his scouts see me. He sends men after me, which means fewer men attacking the ranch. You use that opening to hit his main force hard enough to break their momentum. And when his men catch you, they won't. I'm not actually running. I'm leading them in a circle back toward the ranch. By the time they figure it out, we've either won or lost. But at least we tried something besides sitting here waiting to die." Marie looked up from bandaging another wound. "That's the stupidest plan I've ever heard." "You have a better one?" Silence. "It could work," David said from the doorway. Elena hadn't noticed him arrive. He was bleeding from a cut above his eye, but still standing. "Victor's obsessed with her. He'll take the bait." "He'll also send enough men to make sure she doesn't get away," Caleb said. "We'd be trading Elena's life for a tactical advantage." "A tactical advantage we need," David pressed. "We've lost the barn. We're down to maybe half ammunition, another sustained assault, and we're done. This gives us a chance." Caleb looked at Elena, and she saw the war happening behind his eyes. The need to win versus the refusal to sacrifice the person he was trying to protect. "I'm not asking permission," Elena said quietly. "I'm telling you what I'm going to do. You can help me do it smart, or I can do it alone and probably die. Your choice." "That's not a choice." "Sure it is. It's just not one you like." For a long moment, nobody spoke. Outside, fire crackled and men called to each other in the darkness. The ranch was dying by inches, and everyone in the room knew it. Finally, Caleb spoke. "If we do this, we do it right. Fast horse, good route, someone covering your escape. And you come back alive, non-negotiable." "I'll do my best." "Your best better be excellent." They planned it quickly, no time for elaborate strategy. Elena would take Caleb's fastest horse, the gray mare that could run all day without tiring. She'd head northeast, toward the canyon trail, visible enough that Victor's scouts would spot her, but with enough of a head start to stay ahead. David and 2 others would provide covering fire from the ridge, making it look like the ranch was helping her escape. When Victor's forces split to pursue her, Caleb would lead a counterattack on the weakened main group. Hit hard, hit fast, break their formation before they could regroup. It was desperate and dangerous and would probably get people killed. But doing nothing would definitely get them all killed, so the choice wasn't really a choice at all. Marie pulled Elena aside while Caleb was organizing the men. "You know this is crazy, right?" "I know. And you're doing it anyway." "I'm doing it because it's the only option that doesn't end with everyone here dying because I refuse to marry a man I didn't love. That's not a death I can live with." Marie studied her for a long moment. "You've changed. When you first got here, you looked like you'd given up, like you were just waiting for the world to finish killing you." "Maybe I was." "You're not anymore." Marie pulled her into a quick, fierce hug. "Come back alive. I don't want to have to explain to Caleb why I let you go." They prepared the horse in near darkness, working quickly and quietly. Elena had changed into darker clothes, pants borrowed from one of the ranch hands, a heavy jacket that smelled like smoke. Caleb checked the saddle himself, then checked it again. "The canyon trail splits about 3 miles out," he said. "Take the left fork, it circles back toward the ranch through rough country. They'll have trouble following on horseback. And if they follow on foot, then you run faster." He handed her a pistol. "You know how to use this? Point and shoot." "Close enough." He hesitated, then pulled something from his pocket. "A compass." "My father's. Only thing of his I kept. Take it." "Caleb, take it. You're going to need it more than I will." Elena took the compass, the brass warm from his body heat. "I'll bring it back." "You'd better." They heard a shout from the perimeter. Victor's forces were stirring again, preparing for another assault. Dawn was maybe an hour away, the eastern sky just starting to lighten from black to deep blue. "It's now or never," David said, appearing with his rifle. "We're in position." Elena mounted the horse, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. The mare shifted beneath her, eager to run. Caleb looked up at her, and for once his carefully controlled expression cracked. "I didn't save you from that valley just to watch you die out here." "Then I guess I better not die." "Elena." But she was already moving, kicking the mare into a gallop and heading for the northeast gate. Behind her, David and his men opened fire, making a show of trying to cover her escape. Shouts erupted from Victor's camp, men scrambling, horses being brought up, orders being barked into the pre-dawn darkness. Elena leaned low over the mare's neck and rode like hell itself was chasing her, because it was. She heard them before she saw them, hoofbeats thundering behind her, at least a dozen riders by the sound of it. Victor had taken the bait, dividing his forces just like they'd hoped. She risked a glance back and saw torches bobbing in the darkness, men whipping their horses to catch her. The canyon trail opened before her, a narrow path between rock walls that rose like teeth. She guided the mare into it, trusting the horse to find footing in the darkness. Behind her, the pursuit followed. A gunshot cracked off the rocks above her head. They were getting too close. Elena urged the mare faster, the wind bringing tears to her eyes. The trail twisted and turned, and she took the corners blind, trusting luck and the horse's instincts. Another shot, closer this time. Then the trail split. "Left fork," Caleb had said, "the one that circles back." Elena pulled the reins hard, and the mare nearly stumbled but recovered, plunging into the narrower left trail. Behind her, she heard confusion as her pursuers reached the split, voices arguing about which way she'd gone. That would buy her minutes at best. The trail climbed, rocky and treacherous. The mare was breathing hard now, laboring up the incline. Elena could hear her own breath harsh in her ears, could feel fatigue pulling at her arms and legs. Just a little farther, just get to the high ground and circle back. She crested a ridge and looked back toward the ranch. Even from this distance, she could see the fight happening, muzzle flashes in the darkness, fire still burning in what remained of the barn. Caleb's counterattack must have started. She hoped it was working. She hoped people weren't dying because of her plan. Movement below, her pursuers had figured out which trail she'd taken and were coming up fast. 5 of them, maybe 6. Too many to fight, not enough time to outrun. Elena made a decision. She dismounted, slapped the mare's flank to send her running up the trail, and scrambled into the rocks beside the path. If they were tracking the horse, they'd follow it and miss her completely. It was a stupid plan. It was all she had. She pressed herself into a crevice between 2 boulders, the pistol heavy in her hand, and waited. The riders thundered past, chasing the sound of hoofbeats up the trail. Elena counted to 10, then 20, then forced herself to 30 before moving. She started back down the trail on foot, moving as fast as she dared in the growing light. Her legs were shaking with fatigue and fear, but she kept moving, had to get back to the ranch. Had to know if the plan had worked. A hand grabbed her from behind. Elena screamed and spun, bringing the pistol up, but whoever had grabbed her was faster. The gun went flying, clattering across the rocks, and she was slammed face first into the stone wall. "Found you!" Victor's voice, triumphant and hateful. He spun her around and she saw he was alone. Must have held back while his men chased the horse, waiting to see if she'd double back. Smart. She'd underestimated him. "You've caused me a remarkable amount of trouble," Victor said, his hand around her throat, not quite choking, but close. "All because you couldn't accept your place." Elena clawed at his hand, gasping. "My place isn't under your boot." "No, your place is in the ground with the rest of the defiant fools who thought they could challenge order." He squeezed tighter. "I'm going to kill you now. Then I'm going to kill everyone at that ranch. And when it's over, I'm going to tell a story about a tragic attack by bandits, and everyone will nod and accept it because that's what people do. They accept the story they're told by the man with power." Spots were dancing in Elena's vision. She fumbled at her belt, fingers closing around the knife she'd forgotten she was carrying. A small thing, barely more than a letter opener, borrowed from Marie's kitchen. She drove it into Victor's side. Not deep. The blade was too short, and she was too weak from lack of air, but deep enough to make him let go with a howl of pain. Elena fell, gasping, her vision clearing slowly. Victor staggered back, hand pressed to the wound, blood seeping between his fingers. "You stabbed me," he said, sounding more surprised than hurt. "You were choking me." "You little—" He lunged at her, and Elena scrambled backward, her hand finding a rock. She threw it at his head, missed, found another one, bigger. This one connected with his jaw hard enough to snap his head sideways. Victor went down, and Elena ran. She didn't look back, didn't check to see if he was getting up, just ran down the trail toward the ranch with her lungs screaming and her legs threatening to give out. Gunfire ahead. The battle was still going. She could see the ranch now, could see men fighting in the yard, could see— The shooting stopped. Just stopped, all at once, like someone had called a ceasefire. Elena slowed, breathing hard, trying to understand what she was seeing. Victor's men were pulling back, retreating toward the tree line. Some of them had their hands up. What had happened? She stumbled into the yard just as the sun broke over the eastern ridge, painting everything in gold and red. Caleb was there, standing with his rifle lowered, talking to someone Elena didn't recognize. A man in a uniform. Several men in uniforms, actually. Law. Real law, not frontier justice or settlement authority. Territorial marshals. David saw her first. "Elena, thank heaven, we thought— Where's Victor?" "Canyon Trail. I stabbed him, but I don't think I killed him." She was having trouble focusing, exhaustion and shock catching up with her all at once. "What's happening? Who are these people?" "Marshals," Caleb said, walking over. He looked at her like he was checking for missing pieces. "You hurt?" "Just bruises. Victor tried to choke me." Something dangerous moved across Caleb's face. "Where is he?" "I told you, Canyon Trail. What are the marshals doing here?" The man in uniform stepped forward. "I'm Marshal Robert Hendricks. We received a report about illegal activities in the Ashford settlement. Forced labor, illegal imprisonment, possible murders. We were already en route when we heard the shooting." Elena's brain was moving slowly, but pieces were clicking together. "The documentation, the case file we built. Someone sent it to the territorial office 3 weeks ago," Hendricks said, "along with a request for investigation." Elena looked at Caleb, who was studiously avoiding her gaze. "You sent it," she said. "When?" "The day after Victor's first visit. Figured we should have backup plans." "You didn't tell me." "I didn't want to get your hopes up in case they didn't come." He looked at her then. "Or in case they came too late." Marshal Hendricks was talking to his men, organizing them. "We need to find Victor Hale and take him into custody. Then we'll need statements from everyone involved." "Canyon Trail northeast, about 2 miles out," Elena said. "He's wounded but mobile, and he's not going to come quietly." "They never do," Hendricks said. He detailed 3 of his men to track Victor, then turned back to Caleb and Elena. I'm going to need detailed statements from both of you, and I'll need to interview the other residents, both from the ranch and any settlement members willing to talk. You'll get cooperation, David said, stepping forward. A lot of us are ready to tell what we know. As the marshals organized themselves, Elena felt her legs finally give out. She sat down hard in the dirt, all the fear and adrenaline draining out at once. Marie appeared with water and a blanket, wrapping it around Elena's shoulders like she was a child. Drink, slowly. Elena drank, her hands shaking so badly Marie had to help her hold the cup. Is it over? She asked. The fighting's over, Marie said. The rest? We'll see. The marshals found Victor an hour later, trying to reach his horse despite the knife wound. He fought them, according to the report, had to be subdued with force. When they brought him back to the ranch in chains, his face was purple with rage and blood loss. This is illegal, he was shouting. You have no authority here. The settlement is autonomous under territorial charter. There is no territorial charter, Marshal Hendricks said calmly. You've been operating under false authority for years, Mr. Hale. That ends now. Victor's eyes found Elena in the crowd. You did this. You destroyed everything I built. No, Elena said, standing despite the exhaustion pulling at her. You destroyed it yourself. I just made sure people knew about it. The marshals took him away, still shouting about rights and authority and injustice. Elena watched him go and felt nothing, not triumph, not satisfaction, just a bone-deep weariness. Caleb found her sitting on the porch steps an hour later, watching the sun climb higher. How's John? She asked. Marie says he'll live. Going to have an impressive scar, though. And the others? 2 dead on our side. 4 wounded besides John. Victor lost 6 men, another 8 wounded. Caleb sat down beside her. Could have been worse. Could have been better. Could have been a lot of things. He was quiet for a moment. You stabbed Victor Hale. He was choking me. Seemed like the thing to do. Marie says you used a kitchen knife. It was what I had. Caleb made a sound that might have been a laugh. You rode into a canyon with armed men chasing you, doubled back on foot, fought off a man twice your size with a kitchen knife and walked away. That's either brave or insane. Can it be both? Usually is. They sat in silence, watching the ranch come back to life. People were already working on the barn, salvaging what they could, planning rebuilds. The families who'd taken shelter in the cellar were emerging, blinking in the sunlight. Children were running around like the night's terror had never happened. What happens now? Elena asked. Marshals will investigate, take statements, probably arrest half the settlement council for being complicit. Then they'll set up proper territorial governance, make sure this doesn't happen again. He glanced at her. You'll need to testify. I know. Could take months. You'd have to stay, be available for questions. Is that a problem? No. Caleb's voice was quiet. I was hoping you'd stay anyway. Elena looked at him. Really looked at him. This man who'd saved her life, given her shelter, stood between her and violence, asked for nothing in return except that she not give up. I don't have anywhere else to go, she said. You could. After this, after what you did, you could go anywhere. Start over somewhere Victor's shadow doesn't reach. Maybe I don't want to start over. Maybe I want to finish what we started here. Building a ranch? Building something better than what Victor had. You said it yourself. This place is supposed to be different. Somewhere people don't have to bow to tyrants. I'd like to help with that. Caleb studied her face. It won't be easy. Rebuilding, establishing real law, dealing with the settlement refugees who are going to need somewhere to go when the marshals clean house. We're looking at years of hard work. Good. I'm tired of easy things that turn out to be traps. Something shifted in his expression, the careful control dropping away to show something warmer underneath. I'm glad you're staying. So am I. They sat together as the sun climbed higher, burning away the shadows and the smoke. And for the first time since Thomas died, Elena felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The testimony started 3 days after the attack, when the marshals had set up a temporary office in what used to be the settlement's council building. Elena walked through doors she'd never been allowed to enter before, the inner sanctum where Victor and his chosen men had decided the fates of hundreds of people, and felt a grim satisfaction at seeing it stripped of its authority. Marshal Hendricks had converted the main chamber into an interview room. The ornate chair where Victor used to sit had been replaced with a plain wooden table and two chairs facing each other. The religious paintings that had covered the walls were gone, leaving rectangular shadows on the wood paneling. "Miss Cross," Hendricks said, gesturing to one of the chairs. "Thank you for coming. You said it wasn't optional. It's not. But I appreciate your cooperation nonetheless." He sat across from her, a notepad and pencil ready. "I need you to walk me through everything, from the beginning. Take your time." So Elena told it. All of it. Thomas's death, Victor's proposal, her refusal, the cabin seizure, the kangaroo council meeting, the four men who dragged her into Iron Hollow Valley. Caleb finding her. The warning, the standoff, the siege. Hendricks wrote it all down in careful script, stopping occasionally to ask for clarification. His face remained neutral throughout, but Elena saw his jaw tighten when she described being tied up and left to freeze. "And you're certain it was Jacob Fletcher who cut the ankle ropes?" he asked. I recognized his voice. I'd known him for 2 years. His wife Sarah made me a pie when Thomas died. Did she know what her husband was doing? Elena thought about Sarah Fletcher, quiet, nervous Sarah, who never quite met anyone's eyes. I don't know, maybe. A lot of the women knew things were wrong but couldn't afford to say anything. "We'll be interviewing them as well." Hendricks set down his pencil. "I need to ask you about the documentation you compiled, the list of suspicious deaths and disappearances. Marie and I worked on that together. We interviewed everyone who'd left the settlement, cross-referenced dates, found patterns. How many incidents did you document?" 14 deaths over 6 years that didn't add up. Another 8 women who vanished completely. No bodies, no official record they'd ever existed. Hendricks was quiet for a moment. "That's 22 people that we know about. There could be more." Elena's hands tightened on the edge of the table. Victor was careful. He made things look accidental, natural. Anyone who questioned too loudly ended up as a cautionary tale. "We'll need the original documentation. It's at the ranch. I can bring it tomorrow." The interviews continued for weeks. Elena wasn't the only one testifying. David Pierce came forward, along with a dozen other former settlement members who'd witnessed Victor's methods firsthand. The marshals interviewed everyone, taking statements that filled notebook after notebook. Marie testified about the women she'd helped escape over the years, the ones who'd shown up at Ward Ranch with broken bones and worse. John, still recovering from his gunshot wound, gave testimony about the settlement's practice of indentured servitude disguised as debt forgiveness. Even some of Victor's own men turned witness once they realized the game was over. The picture that emerged was uglier than Elena had imagined. Victor hadn't just been a petty tyrant, he'd built an entire system of control based on fear, debt, and the strategic elimination of anyone who threatened his authority. The settlement council had been his rubber stamp, approving decisions he'd already made while maintaining the fiction of democratic governance. It's textbook cult leadership, Hendricks told Elena after one particularly brutal day of testimony. Isolate the population, control information flow, make yourself the sole source of security and resources. Anyone who dissents becomes an example. Can you prosecute him? For some of it, yes. The attempted murder of you, the arson, the assault on Ward Ranch, those are clear crimes with witnesses. The older cases are harder. Without bodies or direct evidence, we're relying on circumstantial patterns. So he might walk on the murders. He's not walking anywhere. Between the documented crimes and the testimony we're gathering, Victor Hale is looking at 20 years minimum in territorial prison. Hendricks paused. But I won't lie to you, Miss Cross. Perfect justice is rare out here. What we're aiming for is good enough justice. Good enough would have to be sufficient. Elena had learned that lesson the hard way. Perfection wasn't possible in a world run by flawed people making compromised choices. The best you could do was fight for something better and accept the victories you got. While the legal machinery ground forward, life at the ranch found a new rhythm. The burned barn was rebuilt, bigger this time and with better ventilation. Families who'd fled the settlement needed housing, so they added 2 new bunkhouses and a communal kitchen. The population swelled to nearly 60 people, which meant more work but also more hands to share it. Elena found herself in an unexpected role, liaison between the ranch and the marshals, helping coordinate testimony and organize the growing community. She wasn't in charge, exactly, but people kept coming to her with questions, problems, requests. She'd become something like a leader without meaning to. "You're good at this," Caleb said one evening, finding her in the makeshift office they'd set up in the main house. She was surrounded by papers, Housing assignments, work schedules, supply inventories. Good at what? Being overwhelmed? Good at organizing chaos into something functional. Good at making people feel heard. He leaned against the doorframe, watching her work. The ranch is changing, growing. We need someone to help manage that. You're managing fine. I'm good with cattle and fences and making sure things don't fall apart. You're good with people. We need both. Elena set down her pencil, looking at him properly. Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you a partnership. Equal say in how this place runs, how we handle the growth, what we build next. He paused. Assuming you want that. What does a partnership entail exactly? Honestly, I'm making this up as I go, but I figure we split responsibilities. I handle the operational side, you handle the community side. Major decisions we make together. Profits get divided among everyone who works here, proportional to contribution. That's not how most ranches operate. Most ranches aren't trying to build something different. Caleb moved into the room, sitting on the edge of the desk. Victor ran the settlement like a kingdom with himself as king. I don't want to repeat that mistake. This place should belong to the people who work it, not just whoever has the deed. It was a radical idea for the frontier, where property and power usually went hand in hand, but it made sense in a way that felt right. I accept, Elena said. On one condition. What's that? We put it in writing. Clear rules, clear structure, so if either of us dies or leaves, the system survives. Caleb smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. You really have thought about this. I've seen what happens when power isn't constrained. I'm not letting it happen here. They spent the next week drafting what they called the Ward Ranch Charter, a document outlining governance, profit sharing, dispute resolution, and the fundamental principle that all residents had equal voice regardless of gender, background, or how long they'd been there. It wasn't perfect legal language, but it was clear enough that everyone could understand it. When they presented it to the community, the response was mixed. Some people loved it immediately. Others were suspicious, waiting for the catch. A few outright opposed it, arguing that democracy was messy and inefficient. Messy beats tyranny, David said during the debate. I'll take complicated and fair over simple and brutal any day. The vote passed 38-12. Not unanimous, but strong enough to build on. The real test came when Sarah Fletcher showed up at the ranch gate 3 weeks after Victor's arrest. Elena was working in the garden when Marie came to get her, her expression carefully neutral. You have a visitor. You're not going to like it. Sarah stood by the gate, looking smaller than Elena remembered. She was holding a cloth bundle and wouldn't meet Elena's eyes. I shouldn't have come, Sarah said immediately. I'll go. Wait. Elena wasn't sure what she was feeling. Anger, curiosity, something more complicated than either. Why are you here? To apologize. And to give you this. Sarah held out the bundle. It's from your cabin. I saved what I could before they redistributed everything. I thought you might want it back. Elena took the bundle, unfolding the cloth to reveal familiar objects. Thomas's pocket watch, her mother's locket, a book of poetry she'd thought was lost forever. Small things, but they'd been hers, pieces of a life that had been stolen. Thank you, she said quietly. I'm sorry. Sarah's voice cracked. I knew what Jacob was doing to you. I knew it was wrong. I should have said something, should have helped somehow, but I was scared. Victor had already made an example of Catherine Brooks, and I had 3 children to think about, and I'm so sorry. Elena looked at this woman who'd been complicit through silence, who'd saved trinkets from a looted cabin like that could make up for standing by during an attempted murder. She wanted to be angry. Part of her was angry, but she also understood. Come inside, Elena said. We should talk. They sat in the kitchen, and Sarah told her story. Years of watching Victor consolidate power, of seeing women disappear, of knowing her husband participated in the council's worst decisions, and being too terrified to confront him. After the attack on Ward Ranch, Jacob had been arrested along with the others. Sarah and her children were alone now, facing exile from a settlement that was collapsing anyway. I don't expect forgiveness, Sarah said. I just wanted you to know that I see what I did, what I didn't do, and I have to live with that. What are you going to do now? Elena asked. I don't know. The marshals are dismantling the settlement leadership. Most families are scattering, going to other territories where Victor's reputation won't follow them. I thought about taking the children east, maybe finding family. Or you could stay. Sarah looked up, surprised. Here? The ranch is taking in people who want to start over. We're building something different. No councils, no secret rules, just work and fairness. You'd be one voice among many, but you'd have a say. After what my husband did to you? After I stood by and let it happen? Elena thought about it honestly. I can't forget that. And I probably can't fully forgive it either. Not yet. But holding on to anger doesn't undo what happened. It just makes the wound keep bleeding. She paused. You helped women escape over the years, Marie told me. You'd pass along warnings when Victor was targeting someone, help them pack, tell them about safe routes. That counts for something. It doesn't make up for my silence when it mattered most. No, it doesn't. But maybe making different choices now counts for something too. Sarah was quiet for a long time, tears running down her face. I don't deserve this. Probably not. But my husband used to say that grace isn't about deserving. It's about deciding to build forward instead of tearing backward. Elena stood. Think about it. If you want to stay, talk to Caleb. He makes the final call on new residents, but I won't object. Over the following weeks, Sarah wasn't the only former settlement member who arrived at the ranch looking for a fresh start. The marshal's investigation had exposed so much corruption that the settlement essentially dissolved, families choosing to leave rather than try to rebuild under the shadow of Victor's crimes. Not everyone who came was welcome. The ranch held a vote before accepting new residents, and several former council members were turned away. But for those who'd been victims or unwilling participants, the ranch became a kind of sanctuary. The community grew to 80 people by early spring. They added a school, a proper infirmary, a meeting hall for the weekly assemblies where everyone gathered to make decisions. It was messy and loud and sometimes deeply frustrating, but it worked in a way that top-down authority never had. Elena threw herself into the work, helping establish the school, organizing the medical supplies, mediating disputes that arose between people learning to live without a strong man making all the decisions. She was exhausted most days, fell into bed without the energy to dream, but it was a good exhaustion, the kind that came from building instead of surviving. Caleb watched her with something that looked like concern mixed with admiration. You're going to burn yourself out. I'm fine. You're running on coffee and stubbornness. That's not sustainable. It's temporary. Once we get systems in place, it'll get easier. Will it? Or will you just find new problems to solve? Elena didn't have an answer for that. The trial started in late spring, moved to the territorial capital because no local venue could provide an impartial jury. Elena made the 3-day journey to testify, along with Marie, David, and a dozen others. The courthouse was the first proper government building she'd seen since leaving the East. Tall ceilings, polished wood, portraits of men in powdered wigs looking stern and righteous. Victor sat at the defendant's table in chains, looking smaller than he had when he'd commanded the settlement. Prison had aged him, or maybe it was just the absence of power. His expensive clothes were gone, replaced with plain gray. His beard had grown wild. His eyes, when they found Elena in the gallery, held nothing but hate. The prosecution laid out their case methodically. Attempted murder, arson, assault, illegal detention, fraud. The evidence was overwhelming. Testimony from dozens of witnesses, the documentation Elena and Marie had compiled, even confessions from some of Victor's own men who'd turned witness to save themselves. Victor's defense was that he'd been maintaining order in a lawless territory, that his methods might have been harsh, but were necessary for survival. His lawyer painted him as a visionary leader betrayed by ungrateful settlers who couldn't appreciate the security he'd provided. The prosecution's rebuttal was simple. Murder isn't order, and tyranny isn't security. When Elena took the stand, Victor's lawyer tried to paint her as a troublemaker, a woman who'd refused reasonable social expectations and caused chaos through her defiance. You refused Mr. Hale's proposal of marriage, correct? I refused to marry a man I didn't love, yes. And you understand that in frontier society, a widow often requires male protection? I understand that some men use the frontier as an excuse to treat women like property. That's not the same thing. Isn't it true that your refusal upset the settlement's social order? The settlement's social order required women to surrender their autonomy or face death. If my refusal upset that, good. The lawyer tried to rattle her, but Elena had survived too much to be intimidated by courtroom theater. She told the truth clearly and completely, and when she stepped down, she felt lighter than she had in months. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the foreman read the verdict. Guilty on all counts. Victor showed no reaction, just sat there like a statue while the judge sentenced him to 25 years in territorial prison. He'd be an old man when he got out, assuming he survived that long. As they led him away, he looked at Elena one final time. She met his eyes and felt nothing. No triumph, no satisfaction, just a quiet certainty that this chapter was finally closed. Outside the courthouse, David was waiting with the others. "It's over," he said, but it wasn't quite a question. "It's over," Elena confirmed. They celebrated that night in the territorial capital's only decent restaurant, a cramped place that served tough steak and watered-down whiskey. It wasn't fancy, but it felt earned. "To justice," David raised his glass. "Imperfect, but real." "To justice," they echoed. Marie leaned over to Elena. "How do you feel?" "I don't know yet. Ask me tomorrow." But when tomorrow came and they started the journey back to the ranch, Elena found she felt settled in a way she hadn't since Thomas died. The weight she'd been carrying, the fear of Victor, the uncertainty of survival, had finally lifted. The ranch looked different when they returned. Not physically, though construction had continued in their absence. It was the feeling of the place that had changed. People moved with more confidence, spoke with louder voices. The fear that had permeated everything during Victor's shadow was dissipating. "We had a vote while you were gone," Caleb told her that evening, finding her on the porch where she was watching the sunset. "About the ranch's future direction." "What kind of vote?" "Whether to stay a refuge for people fleeing bad situations, or to become something more permanent. A real community with schools, governance, eventually maybe even representation in the territorial legislature." "What did people decide?" 62-8 in favor of permanent community status. They want to build something that lasts, not just a temporary shelter. Elena absorbed this. "That's a big commitment. We'll need more infrastructure, more organization, probably actual laws instead of just guidelines." "I know." Caleb sat beside her. "Which is why they also voted to create a community council. 5 people, elected positions, 1-year terms. They want you to run for one of the seats." "Me?" "You're surprised? You've been organizing this place since you got here. People trust you." "People barely know me. They know you stood up to Victor when it could have gotten you killed. They know you worked yourself half to death helping build this place. That's enough." Elena thought about it. The responsibility, the work, the pressure of trying to build something genuinely new in a world that defaulted to old patterns of power and control. "I'll run," she said. "On one condition." "Always conditions with you. We set term limits. No one serves more than 2 consecutive terms. Power needs to rotate or it corrupts." "Agreed. Anything else?" "Yes. Half the council seats have to be women. No exceptions, no workarounds. We're building this from scratch. We might as well build it right." Caleb smiled. "The old guard is going to hate that." "The old guard can adjust or leave. Those are the options." The first election happened 2 weeks later. Elena won her seat by a comfortable margin, along with Marie, David, a farmer named Robert Chen, and a former teacher named Ann Morrison. Their first act was to formalize the charter into actual bylaws, complete with enforcement mechanisms and appeal processes. It was tedious, unglamorous work, arguing over procedure and language, finding compromises between competing interests, setting precedents that would shape the community for years. But it was also important in a way that felt fundamental. "We're writing the rules," Marie said during one particularly contentious session about water rights. "Not following someone else's rules, not accepting whatever system existed before. Writing them from nothing." That power felt both exhilarating and terrifying. Every decision they made would echo forward, affecting people they'd never meet. The weight of that responsibility sat heavy, but Elena found she could carry it. The ranch, no one called it that anymore, it had become simply Ward's Landing, continued to grow through summer and into fall. More refugees arrived from other troubled settlements, drawn by rumors of a place where women had equal say and councils answered to the people instead of the other way around. Not everyone who came stayed. Some found the democratic process too slow, too messy. Others couldn't adjust to a community where old gender hierarchies didn't apply. But enough people stayed that by first frost, the population had reached 115. They built a proper town square, a grain mill, expanded the school to include older students. Ann Morrison started teaching reading to adults who'd never learned, holding classes by lamplight 3 evenings a week. The blacksmith took on 2 apprentices. Someone started a newspaper, just a single sheet printed once a week, but it was something. Elena found herself working 18-hour days, splitting time between council business and the practical work of keeping a growing community functional. She fell into bed exhausted every night and woke up the next morning to do it again. Caleb pulled her aside one morning when she was trying to mediate a dispute between 2 families over property boundaries. "You need to slow down." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're running yourself into the ground trying to solve every problem personally." He steered her away from the arguing families, ignoring their protests. "You're on the council. That means you help make policy and settle disputes that can't be resolved otherwise. It doesn't mean you're personally responsible for every stubbed toe and hurt feeling. People need help, and we have systems for that now. Committees, procedures, other people who can handle things. You don't have to carry it all yourself." Elena wanted to argue, but the exhaustion hit her all at once. When had she last taken a full day off? When had she last done something just because she wanted to, not because the community needed it? "I don't know how to stop," she admitted. "Then learn, because this pace isn't sustainable, and burning yourself out doesn't help anyone." He was right, though it took her another week to actually accept it. She started delegating more, trusting the systems they'd built to handle routine problems. She took a day off, actually off, not working from a different location, and spent it doing nothing more productive than reading a book by the creek. It felt strange at first, almost wrong, but as the day wore on and nothing terrible happened because she wasn't actively managing it, she started to relax. Marie found her there as the sun was setting. "So this is where you disappeared to. People were worried you'd been kidnapped." "Just taking a day." "Good. You've earned about 100 of them." Marie sat down on the bank beside her. "The council can survive without you for 8 hours." "Apparently." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the water flow past. Eventually, Marie said, "You've changed since you got here. You know that, right?" "How?" "You were barely alive when Caleb carried you in, like someone had scooped out everything important and left just the shell. Now look at you, organizing communities, writing laws, making grown men reconsider whether they really need to argue about fence posts." Elena thought about the woman she'd been in that valley, frozen and broken and ready to give up. That person felt like someone else now, someone she used to know. "I'm not sure I changed," she said slowly. "I think I just remembered who I was before the world tried to make me small." Maybe that's what changing is, remembering the parts you were forced to forget. As fall deepened into winter, Ward's Landing held its first harvest festival, a celebration of the community's survival and growth. There was food, music, dancing. Children ran wild while adults talked and laughed and forgot to worry for a few hours. Elena found herself standing at the edge of the celebration, watching people enjoy the life they'd built together. Sarah Fletcher was there with her children, helping serve food. David was teaching his daughter to dance, both of them laughing when they stumbled over the steps. Marie and John stood close together, his arm around her shoulders, both looking tired but content. Caleb appeared beside her, holding 2 cups of something that smelled like apples and cinnamon. "You're lurking. I'm observing. You're hiding from people who want to thank you for helping build this." He handed her a cup. "Which I get, because gratitude is uncomfortable, but you should at least make an appearance." Elena sipped the drink, spiced cider, sweet and warm. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you'd taken your usual route that day? If you hadn't found me?" "Sometimes, but I did find you, so what's the point in wondering?" "The point is that everything that's happened, all of this, came from one choice you made. To help someone you didn't know, who you had no reason to save." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "I don't think it works like that. You made choices too. To stay instead of run. To fight instead of surrender. To help build this instead of just survive in it. We both made choices, and so did everyone else here. That's what built this place. 100 small decisions to do something different." He was right. This community hadn't sprung from nothing or from one person's heroism. It was the accumulation of choices made by people who'd decided they deserved better than what they'd been given. "Dance with me," Elena said suddenly. Caleb looked startled. "I'm not much of a dancer." "Neither am I. We'll figure it out as we go." They moved into the crowd, finding space among the other couples. The music was simple, played on a fiddle and guitar, and the steps were basic enough that even people with no training could follow along. Caleb had been right about not being a good dancer. He moved like someone who'd spent more time on horseback than on a dance floor. But he was trying, and that mattered more than grace. "This is nice," Elena said as they turned awkwardly through the steps. "This is chaos barely held together by rhythm." "I meant the community, everything we've built. It's nice." Caleb's expression softened. "Yeah, it is." They danced until the music ended and then kept standing there, neither quite ready to let go. Around them, the celebration continued, people laughing and singing and living fully in a moment they'd fought hard to reach. Elena looked at Caleb and saw not just the man who'd saved her, but the partner who'd helped her rebuild, who'd stood beside her through testimony and trials and the messy work of creating something new, who'd believed she was worth saving even when she wasn't sure herself. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For not leaving me to die. For everything that came after." Caleb's hand tightened on hers. "You saved yourself, Elena. I just gave you a place to land." Maybe that was true. Or maybe they'd saved each other in different ways, at different times. Maybe that's what community was. People taking turns holding each other up until everyone learned to stand on their own. The celebration went late into the night, and when Elena finally made her way back to her cabin, she felt more at peace than she could remember. The road from that frozen valley to this moment had been brutal and terrifying and worth every step. She was home. Finally, genuinely home. Not because of a building or a piece of land, but because of the people and the purpose and the life she'd chosen to build. Outside, the first snow of winter was starting to fall, soft and quiet. Elena watched it from her window and remembered another snow. Another night when cold had meant death instead of just weather. The memory didn't hurt the way it used to. It was just part of her story now, the dark chapter that had led to everything bright that came after. She climbed into bed and slept deeply, dreamlessly, secure in the knowledge that tomorrow would bring new challenges and new work, but that she wouldn't face any of it alone. Winter came hard that year, the kind of cold that made old-timers talk about the legendary freeze of 42 when entire herds died standing up. Elena woke most mornings to frost patterns on her window thick enough to block the sunrise, and the communal fires in Ward's Landing burned day and night just to keep the cold from creeping into bones. But the community held. That was the thing she kept coming back to when the work felt overwhelming and the cold made everything harder. They held together when every reason existed to fall apart. The second council meeting of the new year happened on a January morning, so cold that the ink froze in the bottles twice before they could take proper notes. All 5 council members sat bundled in every piece of wool they owned, breath clouding the air between them as they argued about water rights and grain distribution. "We need to expand the well system before spring," Robert Chen was saying, his practical farmer's mind already 3 months ahead. "Population's doubled. Current infrastructure won't support another growing season." "Expanding wells costs money we don't have," Ann Morrison countered. She kept the books and knew exactly how thin their margins were. "We barely scraped through buying seed for spring planting." "Then we need to generate revenue," David said. "The territorial road passes 20 miles south. We could establish a trading post, sell surplus to travelers." "That means building infrastructure we also can't afford," Ann pointed out. They went in circles like this for an hour, the fundamental problem unchanged. They were building a community from nothing with resources that barely existed. Every solution created new problems. Every problem demanded resources they didn't have. Elena listened to it all with half her attention, while the other half worried at a bigger concern. The community was growing faster than they could integrate new people. Families arrived weekly now, fleeing situations similar to what the Ashford settlement had been. They came with stories of abusive leadership, corrupt councils, women treated like property. Ward's Landing had become something like a beacon, and Elena wasn't sure they were ready for what that meant. "We need to talk about the refugee situation," she said, when there was a break in the argument about wells. The table went quiet. "What about it?" Marie asked carefully. "We took in 43 new people last month. 43. We don't have housing, we don't have enough food stores, and we're asking existing residents to share already cramped quarters with strangers. People are getting resentful. So what do you suggest?" David's tone was sharp. "We turn away people who need help? Become exactly what we were running from?" I'm not suggesting we turn anyone away. I'm saying we need a sustainable system instead of just opening the gates and hoping it works out. We have a system, Robert said. New arrivals get temporary housing, contribute work, integrate over time. That's not a system. That's a wish. And it's not working. Elena pulled out the notes she'd been keeping. We had 3 fights last week between original residents and newcomers. The school is so overcrowded that Anne's teaching in shifts. We're rationing food in January, which means we'll be starving by March. The reality of it sat heavy on the table. They'd been so focused on being different from places like Ashford that they'd forgotten to be practical. Caleb, who'd been sitting in on the meeting as a non-voting observer, finally spoke. Elena's right. We're growing too fast without structure. We need to slow intake, establish real processes for integration, make sure we can actually support the people we're taking in. That feels like abandoning our principles, David said, but he sounded less certain now. It's not abandoning anything, Elena said. It's choosing to help people effectively instead of helping them poorly. A community that collapses from overextension doesn't help anyone. After another hour of debate, they voted to implement a structured intake process. Applicants would be evaluated for skills the community needed, temporary housing would be formalized with clear expectations, and there would be a cap on new arrivals each month until infrastructure caught up. It felt like defeat even though it was necessary. Elena had spent so much energy fighting against systems that excluded people that creating her own exclusions felt like hypocrisy. Marie found her after the meeting, standing outside in the brutal cold because sometimes the wind felt better than the weight of compromise. You did the right thing in there. Did I? We're turning away people who need help because we can't manage what we've already got. We're making sure we can actually help people instead of just collecting refugees until everyone starves together. There's a difference. Marie pulled her coat tighter. You can't save everyone, Elena. You can only save who you can reach without drowning yourself. That's a cruel calculus. It's the only calculus that works. You think you're the first person to learn that lesson? This is what building something real looks like. Hard choices and compromises, and living with the fact that perfect isn't possible. Elena knew she was right. Knowing didn't make it easier. The intake restrictions created backlash. Some residents accused the council of betraying the community's founding principles. Others organized a petition demanding they rescind the caps. There was even talk of a recall vote to remove Elena and replace her with someone who wouldn't abandon the vulnerable. She probably should have defended herself, but Elena was too tired to fight. She'd spent a year working herself half to death, and the thanks she got was being called a hypocrite by people who'd been here 3 weeks. Caleb found her in the barn late one night, mucking stalls because physical labor felt simpler than the political mess. Hiding isn't your style. I'm not hiding, I'm working. You're avoiding people who want to yell at you, which is a kind of hiding. He grabbed a pitchfork and joined her. For what it's worth, you made the right call. Everyone keeps saying that. Doesn't change the fact that I'm turning away families who need help. No, you're making sure the help you give actually helps instead of just spreading misery thinner. That's leadership. Leadership feels like choosing who deserves to suffer. Caleb stopped working, leaning on his pitchfork. You remember what you told me when you first decided to stay? You said you wanted to build something better than what Victor had. Well, this is what better looks like. It's messy and complicated, and sometimes you have to make choices that feel wrong to keep the whole thing from collapsing. That's not failure. That's the cost of actually building something. Elena set down her own pitchfork, exhaustion finally catching up with her. What if I'm not good enough for this? What if I'm just repeating the same patterns in a different form? Then you'd be surrounded by yes men instead of people organizing petitions against you. The fact that people feel comfortable disagreeing with you publicly means you're doing something right. He paused. But if you're really worried, let's put it to a vote. Community meeting, full transparency. Let everyone weigh in. They held the meeting a week later in the town hall, packed so tight that people stood shoulder to shoulder. Elena presented the council's reasoning: limited resources, need for sustainable growth, importance of helping people effectively rather than symbolically. Then she opened the floor for discussion. The arguments came fast and heated. Some supported the restrictions, pointing to overcrowding and resource strain. Others opposed them, saying the community had a moral obligation to help everyone who asked. A few tried to find middle ground, suggesting different criteria or temporary measures. Elena listened to all of it without defending herself, letting people speak their minds. This was what she'd wanted to build. A place where voices mattered, where decisions weren't handed down from above. The fact that some of those voices were currently calling her judgment into question was part of the deal. Finally, Sarah Fletcher stood up. She rarely spoke at community meetings, still uncomfortable with public attention after years of being silenced. "I want to tell you something," Sarah said, her voice quiet but carrying. "When I came here 6 months ago, I was desperate. My husband was in prison, my children were hungry, and I had nowhere else to go. Elena could have turned me away. I was married to one of the men who tried to kill her. Instead, she gave me a chance." She paused, looking directly at Elena. "But she also made me work, made me prove I was here to build something, not just take from it. She didn't just let me in because I was desperate. She made sure I could contribute. That's not cruelty. That's respect. It's saying you're capable of more than just being saved." Sarah sat down, and the hall was quiet for a moment. Then David stood. "Sarah's right. We're not doing people a favor by letting them in when we can't support them. We're setting them up to fail, and ourselves along with them. The restrictions aren't perfect, but they're honest about our limitations." The vote, when it came, was closer than Elena expected, 58 to 47 in favor of maintaining the intake restrictions. Not a landslide, but enough to move forward. After the meeting, Elena found herself surrounded by people wanting to talk, some to thank her, others to express continued disagreement but respect for the process. She listened to all of them, exhausted but grateful that they were talking instead of just obeying. Caleb waited until the crowd cleared before approaching. "How are you holding up?" "I'm learning that leadership means making everyone at least a little bit unhappy. That's because you're doing it right. The minute everyone agrees with you completely, that's when you should worry." Spring came eventually, as it always did, turning the frozen landscape into mud and then green. The intake restrictions worked better than Elena had hoped. New arrivals came with needed skills, integrated more smoothly, contributed rather than just consumed. The community's growth slowed but stabilized. By summer, Ward's Landing had a functioning trading post, an expanded well system, and a school building that could actually hold all its students at once. They'd established connections with other settlements, trading surplus for what they needed. The council had survived 2 more elections with completely different members, proving the system could outlast any individual. Elena's second term was ending, and she'd decided not to run for a third. She'd said what she needed to say, done what she could do. It was time to let other voices lead. Marie tried to convince her otherwise. The community needs you. The community needs to learn it doesn't need any single person. That's the whole point. Elena was packing up the small office she'd used for council work, sorting through 2 years of notes and decisions. "We built something that survives individual people leaving. I should trust it." "What will you do instead?" "I don't know. Work the land, help with the school maybe. Figure out who I am when I'm not solving everyone else's problems." It sounded simple, but it felt terrifying. Elena had spent so long defining herself by what she was fighting against or building toward that the idea of just existing felt foreign. Caleb found her on the porch that evening, watching the sun set over land that had become genuinely home. "Marie says you're stepping down. My term's up. Time for someone else." "You could run again. You'd win." Probably. But that doesn't mean I should." Elena pulled her knees up, wrapping her arms around them. "I need to learn how to be part of a community instead of running it." Caleb sat beside her, and they watched the colors bleed across the sky in comfortable silence. It had taken Elena a long time to appreciate this, how silence with another person could feel like companionship instead of loneliness. "I've been thinking about something," Caleb said eventually. "Dangerous habit. I'm serious. We've built this place into something real, something that works, but it's still just us trying to be different from what we escaped. What if we tried to be something more?" "Like what?" "Like a model. We've proven that communities can function without authoritarian leadership, that women can have equal voice, that democratic processes work on the frontier. Other settlements are watching. What if we help them build similar systems?" Elena turned to look at him. "You want to export our model?" "I want to spread the idea that there are alternatives to the Victor Hales of the world, that people don't have to accept tyranny just because it's called order." It was ambitious and possibly naive, and exactly the kind of thing that could make a real difference. "That's a long-term project," Elena said slowly. "Years of work. training, documentation, probably traveling to help other communities establish similar systems. I know. You're talking about building something bigger than Ward's Landing. I'm talking about making sure what happened here doesn't stay isolated, that other women don't have to get left in valleys to freeze before they find a place where their voice matters. Elena thought about the woman she'd been in that valley, broken and betrayed and certain she'd die forgotten. If she could speak to that version of herself, what would she say? That survival was possible? That fighting back mattered? That there were places and people worth the effort? "I'm in," she said. "But we do it right. Documentation, training programs, support systems. We don't just tell people to be democratic, we give them the tools to actually make it work." Caleb smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that." They started small. Elena and Ann Morrison worked on documenting every process the council had established, how they ran elections, resolved disputes, managed resources. It was tedious work, turning lived experience into transferable knowledge. But it mattered. Meanwhile, Caleb reached out to other settlements through the trading networks, offering Ward's Landing as a resource for communities wanting to restructure their governance. The response was mixed. Some settlements were interested, others were actively hostile to the idea that their current systems were flawed. But enough were interested to matter. The first group arrived in late summer, representatives from 3 different settlements, all dealing with variations of the problems Ward's Landing had faced. They spent 2 weeks learning the systems, asking questions, pushing back on ideas that didn't fit their context. Elena found herself in the strange position of teacher, trying to explain not just what they did, but why it worked. It forced her to think deeply about the principles underneath the practices, to articulate what had been intuitive. The key thing, she told a woman from a settlement dealing with an abusive council, is that power has to be distributed and temporary. The minute anyone can hold power indefinitely, they start to think they deserve it. Term limits, regular elections, clear recall processes, those aren't bureaucracy, they're insurance against tyranny. "But what if the person in power is good?" the woman asked. "What if they're the only one who can lead effectively? Then they should be confident enough in their ideas to let someone else implement them. And if they're not willing to step down, that's proof they've already started thinking of the position as theirs by right. That's when the corruption begins." It was a hard lesson, and Elena had learned it by watching herself. She'd been good at council work, effective at solving problems, and she'd started to think that meant she needed to stay in the position, that the community needed her specifically. That was the beginning of the same thinking that had enabled Victor. The difference was that she'd recognized it and stepped away before it calcified into entitlement. Over the following year, Ward's Landing became something like a training ground for democratic governance on the frontier. Small groups came through regularly, learning systems and adapting them to their own contexts. Not all the experiments worked. Some communities reverted to old patterns. Others tried to implement changes too quickly and created chaos. But enough worked to matter. By the second year, 5 settlements had successfully transitioned to council-based governance. By the third year, that number had tripled. The idea was spreading that alternatives existed, that frontier life didn't have to mean accepting whatever strong man claimed authority. Elena watched it happen with a mixture of pride and caution. She knew how fragile these new systems were, how easily they could collapse back into tyranny if people stopped paying attention. But she also knew that the only way to build something lasting was to accept the risk and keep building anyway. One evening in early fall, 2 years after she'd stepped down from the council, Elena was working in the expanded garden when a rider approached. She didn't recognize him, but his horse was good, and his clothes suggested he'd traveled far. "I'm looking for Elena Cross," he said. "You found her." Elena stood, brushing dirt from her pants. "Can I help you?" "My name's James Morrison. I'm from the Territorial Governor's office." He dismounted, pulling out official-looking papers. "The governor has been watching the developments here in Ward's Landing and the spread of your governance model to other settlements." Elena's stomach tightened. Official attention could go either way, recognition or suppression. "And?" she asked carefully. "And he's impressed. He's asked me to extend an invitation for you to serve as an advisor to the territorial government on community development and democratic structures. The position would be based in the capital, but require regular travel to settlements across the territory." Elena stared at him. "The governor wants me to advise the government?" "Yes, ma'am. The territory's growing fast and the old informal power structures aren't working anymore. We need systematic approaches to governance, particularly in frontier communities. Your work here has proven that democratic systems can function in harsh conditions. It was an opportunity to spread the ideas even further, to influence territorial policy instead of just individual settlements. It was also a trap. Getting pulled into government bureaucracy, spending time in rooms with officials instead of doing the actual work. I need to think about it, Elena said. Of course. I'll be in the area for a few days if you want to discuss details. After he left, Elena found Caleb in his usual spot, reviewing accounts in the small office he still maintained despite no longer running the day-to-day ranch operations. The territorial government wants to hire me as an advisor, she said without preamble. Caleb looked up, one eyebrow raised. That's unexpected. What did you say? That I'd think about it. Elena sat down across from him. I don't know if it's a good idea. Government work, bureaucracy, politics. That's not what I'm good at. You literally spent 2 years building a functional government from nothing. That's exactly what you're good at. That was different. That was building something new. This would be trying to change something that's already established, already resistant to change. So, you've done harder things. Elena thought about that. Had she done harder things? Surviving the valley, fighting Victor, building Ward's Landing. Those had all felt impossible at the time, but she'd done them anyway. I'd have to leave here, she said. Move to the capital, be gone for months at a time. The community would survive without you. You made sure of that. I know. That's not what I'm worried about. She paused, trying to articulate the real concern. I'm worried I've already done my part, that the next fight belongs to someone else, and I should just rest. Caleb studied her face. Are you tired of fighting, or are you scared of what happens if you keep succeeding? The question hit harder than Elena expected. She'd spent so much time afraid of failure that she'd never considered the fear of success, the responsibility that came with actually making a difference, the weight of knowing that people would follow your lead. Maybe both, she admitted. Then here's my advice. Don't decide based on fear. Decide based on what you actually want to do with the rest of your life. Elena went for a walk that evening, following the trails she'd learned by heart over the years. The landscape had changed. Trees she'd planted were growing. Fields she'd helped clear were producing. Buildings she'd helped raise were standing solid. Ward's Landing bore the marks of her work, but it wasn't hers. It belonged to everyone who'd built it, everyone who continued building it. She could stay here and be part of that continued building, or she could take what she'd learned and try to spread it further, wider, deeper into the territory's developing structures. Both options were good. That's what made the choice hard. She found herself at the spot where Caleb had first brought her, half dead from the valley. The cabin was gone now, replaced by one of the bunkhouses, but she still remembered exactly where she'd woken up, what it had felt like to realize she'd survived. Sarah Fletcher was there, sitting on the porch of the nearby building, watching her own children play in the fading light. Mind if I join you? Elena asked. Please? Sarah made room on the step. You look like you're carrying something heavy. Just trying to figure out what comes next. Elena sat down, watching the children chase each other in circles. The territorial government offered me a position. I can't decide if I should take it. What's holding you back? Fear that I'll fail. Fear that I'll succeed. Fear that I don't know who I am anymore without a crisis to fight against. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Can I tell you something? When I first got here, I thought I was broken. I'd spent years being someone's wife, someone's mother, never just Sarah. And when all that got stripped away, I didn't know what was left. What did you find? That I was still there. That all those roles were things I did, not who I was. And that figuring out who I actually am was terrifying and necessary and worth doing. She looked at Elena. You've spent 2 years being the woman who survived Victor, who built Ward's Landing, who changed how frontier communities think about governance. That's what you've done. But who are you underneath all that? It was the question Elena had been avoiding. Who was she when she wasn't fighting or building or surviving? What did she want when survival wasn't the primary concern? She thought about it honestly. What brought her satisfaction? Teaching people how to build better systems, seeing communities transform from authoritarian to democratic, watching women realize they could have voices that mattered. The work itself, Not the recognition or the position or the power. She wanted to keep doing that work. The scale didn't matter. Whether it was one settlement or the whole territory, the core was the same. She wanted to help people build better, fair, more human systems of living together. I'm going to take the position, Elena said, the certainty settling in as she spoke. Not because I have to, but because I want to. Because there's more work to do and I'm not ready to stop yet. Sarah smiled. Good. You would have been terrible at retirement anyway. Elena gave her notice to the council, explained her decision to the community, and spent the next month preparing for the transition. Ward's Landing would be fine without her. That had been the point all along. Building something that didn't need any single person to survive. The night before she left for the capital, the community threw a gathering in the town hall. There were speeches and thanks, and a surprising number of people crying. Elena kept her own remarks brief, focusing on the future rather than the past. I'm not leaving because the work here is done, she told the assembled crowd. I'm leaving because it's in good hands and there's work elsewhere that needs doing. What we built here proves that alternatives exist. Now we need to make sure those alternatives spread. Caleb walked her back to her cabin afterward, the night air crisp with the promise of autumn. You're going to change the territory, he said. I'm going to try. Might fail spectacularly. Probably will, at least a few times. But you'll figure it out. He paused at her door. For what it's worth, I'm proud of you. Of who you've become since that night in the valley. Elena thought about the woman he'd found, half frozen, broken, ready to give up. I'm not sure I became someone different. I think I just remembered who I was before people tried to make me forget. Maybe that's what growth is, remembering the parts of yourself you were forced to hide. She left for the capital the next morning, riding the same gray mare that had carried her through the canyon when Victor's men were chasing her. The horse was older now, slower, but still strong enough for the journey. Elena looked back once as Ward's Landing disappeared behind the ridge. The community she'd helped build was continuing without her. Children heading to school, adults heading to work, the council preparing for their morning meeting. Life going on because the systems they'd built didn't depend on any single person. That was the real victory, she realized. Not that she'd survived, not that she'd fought back, not even that she'd helped build something better. The real victory was that what they'd built could outlast her, that the ideas would spread and evolve and maybe, eventually, help create a world where women didn't get left in valleys for saying no. The work at the territorial capital was exactly as frustrating and bureaucratic as Elena had feared. The governor was well-meaning but cautious, more interested in maintaining stability than pursuing change. The other advisors were mostly men who'd built their careers on frontier strongman mythology and weren't thrilled about a woman suggesting their approaches were fundamentally flawed. But Elena had learned patience along with everything else. She didn't try to change everything at once, didn't demand immediate revolution. She started with documentation, with case studies, with evidence that democratic systems actually worked when implemented properly. She traveled constantly, visiting settlements across the territory, helping communities transition from authoritarian to democratic governance. Some transitions went smoothly, others were disasters that taught her what not to do next time. A year into the position, she was visiting a settlement called Riverside when she met a young woman named Clara, who reminded her powerfully of herself. Clara had refused to marry the settlement founder's son and was facing retaliation for her defiance. I don't know what to do, Clara said, her voice shaking. If I stay, they'll make my life hell. If I run, I have nowhere to go. Elena looked at this woman standing at the same crossroads she'd faced years ago and made a decision. You have a third option. Stay and fight. Organize the other women who are tired of being treated as property. Document the abuses. Build a case, then bring it to the territorial authorities and force them to intervene. That's dangerous. So is running. So is giving up. At least fighting means you have a chance of winning. She spent 3 weeks in Riverside, helping Clara and the other women build their case, teaching them the strategies that had worked in Ward's Landing. When she left, they had a plan and the courage to implement it. 6 months later, she got word that Riverside had successfully removed its founder from power and established a democratic council. Clara had been elected to one of the seats. That was worth all the frustrating meetings with cautious bureaucrats, all the travel, all the exhaustion. One more community transformed, one more woman who'd learned her voice mattered. The work continued for 3 years. Elena traveled, taught, documented, advised. She watched the territory slowly shift from a collection of independent strongman fiefdoms to something resembling organized democratic governance. It was messy and incomplete and better than what had existed before. On a spring morning in her 4th year with the territorial government, Elena received word that Victor Hale had died in prison. Pneumonia, according to the official report, though the real cause was probably age and the gradual failure of a body that had lived too long on anger. She felt nothing when she heard. No satisfaction, no relief, just acknowledgement that a chapter had truly closed. Caleb sent a letter along with the news. Thought you should know. The settlement's been fully dissolved now, land redistributed to the families who worked it. Last piece of his empire gone. Marie says to tell you she's planting flowers where the council building used to stand. Seemed appropriate. Elena stood on the balcony of her small apartment in the capital, reading the letter again. Flowers where the council building used to stand. Life growing where power had died. It felt like the right ending. She stayed with the territorial government for 2 more years, until the systems she'd helped build were stable enough to survive without her direct involvement. Then, at 42 years old, Elena Cross resigned her position and went home. Ward's Landing had changed in her absence. The population had grown to nearly 300. There were 2 schools now, a proper hospital, a grain mill that served 5 surrounding communities. The council was on its 8th election cycle, with entirely different faces than when she'd left. But the core remained, the fundamental belief that people deserve to govern themselves, that voices mattered regardless of gender, that power needed to be distributed and temporary or it would corrupt. Caleb met her at the edge of town, looking older but still solid. Welcome back. Feels strange, like visiting someone else's memory. It's changed. You helped build something that keeps changing, keeps growing. That's what you wanted, isn't it? It was. Elena had spent years fighting against stagnation disguised as tradition. The fact that Ward's Landing continued evolving meant the systems were working. She bought a small piece of land on the outskirts of town and built a cabin. Not large, just enough for one person and the occasional visitor. She helped with the schools, taught civic governance to anyone who wanted to learn, wrote extensively about democratic systems and frontier justice. She lived simply and deliberately, learning finally to exist without crisis, without the constant pressure of building and fighting and surviving. Marie visited often, bringing gossip and news from the community. John had retired from ranch work. Their children were grown and leading their own lives. Sarah Fletcher had remarried, was happy in a way she'd never been allowed to be before. You changed a lot of lives, Marie said one afternoon, sitting on Elena's porch drinking tea. I survived long enough to help people change their own lives. That's different. Is it? You showed people alternatives existed. That's powerful. What's powerful is that they chose to build those alternatives. I just pointed at the possibility. 1 year after her return, Caleb showed up at her cabin with a proposal that wasn't quite a proposal. I've been thinking, he said, settling into the chair across from her. We've known each other almost 8 years now. We've built a community together, survived a war, changed how frontier governance works. We're good partners. We are, Elena agreed, not sure where this was going. So I was thinking maybe we should formalize that partnership. Not marriage, necessarily. I know that word carries weight for you. But building a life together intentionally, making it official somehow. Elena studied him. This man who'd saved her life, stood beside her through everything that followed, never demanded more than she could give, but never settled for less than honesty. What would that look like, she asked. However we want it to look. We're making up all the rules anyway. Might as well make up ones that actually fit who we are. They talked for hours, figuring out what partnership meant to them. Not ownership, not obligation, just 2 people choosing to build forward together. They made it official in front of the community, not a traditional wedding, but a commitment ceremony that acknowledged their partnership without invoking the language and structures that had been used to oppress. Life settled into something Elena had never quite believed possible. Peaceful, but not stagnant. Purposeful, but not desperate. She taught, she wrote, she helped communities across the territory build better systems. She lived with Caleb in the house they built together, sharing work and conversation and silence. Years passed. The territory became a state with actual laws and infrastructure. Ward's Landing was no longer unusual. Democratic councils and equal representation had become common enough to be unremarkable. The revolution she'd helped start had succeeded by becoming ordinary. Elena was 63 when she got word that the state legislature was establishing a permanent archive of frontier governance documents and wanted to include her work. They were calling it the Cross Collection, which felt both honoring and strange. "Your name's going to be in history books," Caleb said when she told him. "That's not what I was trying to do." "No, you were just trying to survive and maybe help some people along the way. Turns out that's how most important changes happen. People solving immediate problems without worrying about legacy." Elena thought about the woman she'd been in that valley, certain she would die forgotten. If she could tell that version of herself about the archive, about the communities that had adopted her models, about the women leading councils across the state, would it have helped? Maybe. Or maybe that woman just needed to know that survival was possible, that fighting back mattered, that the world could be different, even if she never saw the full extent of the change. On a winter morning, 32 years after Caleb had found her in Iron Hollow Valley, Elena stood at the dedication ceremony for the new Ward's Landing Community Center. It was built on the exact spot where the original barn had burned during Victor's attack. Flowers had grown there for years before they'd finally decided to build something permanent. The current council chair, a woman Elena had taught in the first school, gave a speech about the community's history and values. Elena listened from the back, content to be one face in the crowd instead of the center of attention. After the ceremony, a young girl approached her, maybe 10 years old, with serious eyes and questions that needed answering. "My teacher said you helped start this place, that you fought bad people and won." Elena smiled. "I survived bad people and helped build something better. That's not quite the same as fighting and winning." "Did you get scared?" "Every day." "But you did it anyway?" "I did it anyway, because being scared and doing nothing felt worse than being scared and trying." The girl thought about this seriously. "I want to be brave like you when I grow up." "Then don't be like me. Be like yourself, but braver. Figure out what matters to you and fight for it, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." The girl nodded like this was wisdom worth keeping, then ran off to join her friends. Caleb appeared beside Elena, offering his arm. "Ready to go home?" "Yeah, I'm ready." They walked back to their cabin through streets Elena had helped plan, past buildings she'd helped raise, through a community that had grown beyond anything she'd imagined that first desperate winter. The sun was setting, painting everything in gold and red, and the air smelled like wood smoke and bread baking. Elena thought about the journey from that frozen valley to this moment. All the pain and fear and fighting, all the building and teaching and changing. It hadn't been smooth or perfect or anything like the stories people told about heroes who changed the world. It had been messy and difficult, and sometimes she'd made choices she still questioned. But it had also been worth it. Every hard step and complicated decision and moment when giving up would have been easier. She'd been meant to disappear, to die forgotten in a valley as punishment for refusing to be property. Instead, she'd lived. She'd fought. She'd helped build something that outlasted her individual contribution. That wasn't destiny or fate or anything grand. It was just one woman choosing to survive, and then choosing to help others do the same, and then choosing to build systems so that survival didn't have to be such a brutal fight. Small choices, accumulated over years, adding up to a life that mattered. That evening, sitting on their porch watching the stars come out, Caleb asked the question he'd asked before. "How do you feel?" Elena thought about it honestly. "I feel like I did what I was supposed to do. Not what someone else decided for me, but what I chose for myself. And that's enough." It was. After everything, the valley and the fear and the fighting, the building and the compromising and the growing, being able to say she'd lived a life she chose was enough. The stars came out one by one, ancient and indifferent, and somewhere in the distance a coyote called. The sound didn't frighten Elena anymore. It just sounded like the frontier, wild and harsh and beautiful in its refusal to be tamed. She'd learned to be like that too. Not tamed, not smoothed into someone palatable, but fully herself in all the complicated, difficult, determined ways that meant. She was Elena Cross, and she'd refused to disappear. Instead, she'd built a future where disappearing wasn't the only option for women who dared to say no. That was her legacy. Not perfection, not some impossible standard, just proof that alternatives existed for anyone brave enough to reach for them. And that, Elena had learned, was the only kind of change that lasted, the kind built by imperfect people making hard choices and accepting that good enough was sometimes the best possible victory in an imperfect world.